No, sincerity, I'm all about life balance.
Life balance is
a great way to start.
The key. It's a great way to start. So Daniel, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in and joining me. It's been ages.
Decades.
Decades?
Yeah. I think I met you around 2006.
2006 in Shanghai.
In Shanghai.
Yeah, when I was living there.
Decade and a half. Yeah.
It's been a while. It's been a while. We can say it's been a long time, but it's been a good run. You were in China for what, like 20 years?
This last stint was 14.
Okay.
And I was there also in Shanghai for a couple years in the early 90s amongst 5 other countries. Yeah.
So just bouncing around, helping people move stuff all around the world.
Sometimes I was in ocean freight forwarding. Sometimes I was in ocean container shipping. I was in warehousing. I was in trucking. And also what I'm in now, which is called BCO, Beneficial Cargo Owner, a fancy word for an importer or a subcontract manufacturer, the people that make stuff.
Right.
So sometimes I moved to stuff, handled stuff, and made stuff. Now I'm into the made stuff age.
Okay.
Or stage.
But okay. So basically you're like a global supply chain expert.
I would accept that.
Yeah. Okay. Because that's great, because the supply chains that we're dealing with in our world right now are a complete mess. So it's great to have you here now at this moment to answer some questions and to give us some insight. Because I think people don't understand what's going on with our shipping lanes around the world and with our supply chain constraints and how that leads to rising prices for everyone involved.
At the end of the day, it's all about delivering the right product at the right price at the right time to the right place and all that. So you're right on in what you said, that inflation is the common denominator. That if you do something wrong, prices go up.
If you do something wrong, prices go up. Even if you do something right, I feel like prices can go up sometimes.
It's true, but it means something happened and you didn't react either with proper forecasting or with proper agility on how to react to it. What I like is in the last couple of years, one good thing that came out of COVID, if there's only one good thing, it is people understand what is the term supply chain, right?
Right.
And even till today, I found that I have to explain to people how fundamental supply chain is. When you look at a company or corporation, you have your CEO, your CFO, even your chief marketing officer, chief internet or investment officer. Now you're having a supply chain director sitting at the board, the C-suite, sometimes replacing the operations VP, because it's the skeleton, the backbone of any company. It touches every facet of the company, supply chain does.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine who is a supply chain management expert. He lives in like Hong Kong and Shenzhen and manages a company that will remain unnamed, and all their manufacturing that comes out of China. And I remember how stressed he was during COVID because things were just not moving, and factories were delayed, trucks were delayed, ships. Some of the ships weren't even allowed onto shore at some stages, and like boats were being stuck out in the water for like weeks and months.
We call them ships, not boats.
Ships, not.
Yeah, it's a size thing.
It's a size thing, yes. But ships, large ocean liners, massive ocean liners. But let's take a bit of a step back. So where are you from originally?
Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
Born at Mount Sinai Hospital in 1963 in Baltimore. My dad was a supply chain guru.
Oh, so this is in the family.
It's in the family. It's in the blood. So it wasn't called supply chain back in the 60s or 50s even back then. It was called physical distribution management.
Physical distribution management.
Yeah, you're moving things.
Yeah.
Right, and distributing things.
Right.
And you manage that process. So he was the executive vice president of marketing for CSX Railroad.
Oh, so he was doing it on the railroads.
Well, a lot more than that. It started off that way. He started off as a CPA and an early computer programmer for the railroads back when it was, if you ever played Monopoly, it was B&O and C&O Railroad.
I loved Monopoly.
Well, they merged and became the Chessie system with a beautiful cat on the logo. I still have some of his whiskey glasses with Chessie cats on them.
Oh, nice.
Great giveaway item. So later, Chessie system merged with Seaboard Coastline up the East Coast and became CSX Railroad, one of the big 3 railroads in America today.
Right.
So he was the highest ranking Jewish railroad executive in the history of U.S. railroads.
Wow, that's no small feat.
Yeah. And because it was you're dealing with anti-Semitic corporations back 50 years ago. Not that you don't now, but it was more so then.
Right.
And he was able to work his way up because he was so astute at forecasting and building successful companies. So one of the things he did was very relevant to this topic is he was able to set up a trucking operation to almost act like a hub and spoke to the railroads. So the railroads are very good at east-west. And if you want to go from, let's say, a Baltimore to a Cleveland, or a New York to a Chicago to Kansas City, that's straight line.
Right.
But what do you do about the offshoot cities, the Cincinnatis, the Columbuses, the Pittsburghs, et cetera? Well, he would essentially set up the trucks that would pick up the container off the train, put it onto a truck, and do local deliveries, but all under one ownership. Okay. So that was revolutionary. Today, it's common.
Today, we see it all the time. I mean, like how sophisticated the logistics are in the United States.
He set up a company called CMX, Chessie Motor Express, to do that quite successfully.
Amazing.
And that was one of the things he did. And then what got me started in my career, because he knew of his 5 kids, I was the one that had that international bug.
Were you the youngest?
I'm the baby of 5. Yep, little Danny.
I think there's something about being the youngest that just makes you want to go off and do something crazy. I'm the oldest, and I went to China as well, randomly. But I think there's something quite, there's a wild itch.
I was itchy.
Yeah.
So basically, he knew I wanted to get involved in international trade. He had left the railroad by that time. It went to Leaseway Transportation, a big trucking company in America, and realized one of the feeders to the trucks, a way to find customers, was to build an international arm of ocean freight forwarding to feed containers coming from Asia into their trucking network. So he set up an international operation of Leaseway and got me, right out of college, I had a job offer to work in logistics for an air freight company in Caracas, Venezuela, because I spoke Spanish coming out of college. Okay. Well, American Spanish back then. And it got better later on.
That's solid.
It got better later on. But he convinced me to turn down that job offer in Caracas and move from Oxford, Ohio to Taipei, Taiwan to go learn Mandarin because he thought that's the future. He had just gotten back from a trip to China, was invited to a Peoples to Peoples conference to talk about double stack trains and explain how distribution and logistics works in the United States to the PRC government back in 78, 79.
Oh my God, that was just before like the whole reform and opening and Deng Xiaoping and shit.
Right at the beginning of the wave, and got me over there. So I moved there in 85 to Taiwan to learn Mandarin at his insightful forecasting.
There was a great wave of like early Chinese pioneers from the Western world that ended up going to Taiwan first to learn Mandarin before going to the mainland.
Absolutely.
And it's so crazy because when I made my pilgrimage to China in 2001, I just went straight to China because like the feeling of China was totally different between like the mid 80s when it was like, oh, is it open? Is it not open? Yep. Is it comfortable? Is it not comfortable? Whereas by 2001, at least in my eyes, like China was totally open and ready for tourism and ready for visitors from all over the world. It was quite a powerful, like the early 2000s were quite special.
It's 100% right. And go back even earlier. First time I visited mainland China or People's Republic of China was 1986.
Oh, wow.
And I visited almost every year until we ended up moving there. My wife and I and our son, who was 6 months old, and our daughter, who was in my wife's belly at the time, from Indonesia to China in 92. And it was quite basic back then.
Yeah, I bet.
But over the years, every year you saw the construction, the buildings, the highways, the modernization, and the building of a middle class, and you could just see the transformation in front of your eyes. It was amazing. So by the time you came there, it was already more normal.
Yeah, it was much more stable. Mm-hmm. That's what it felt like.
Yep.
So let's go back a bit. So you grew up in Baltimore. Your father was a logistics guru. Where did you go to university?
I ended up, when I was 11, we moved to Cleveland, another big railroad hub where he was still with the same railroad company. So I grew up on the east side of Cleveland, a city called Shaker Heights, which is a fantastic town because it was the model of racial integration.
Okay.
If you don't mind me going off on a tangent.
Go for it. I love it.
Tangent.
This is all about tangent.
Okay, let's go.
Fire away.
Let's go tangent. So Shaker Heights was really cool about it. And I think there's been some movies made about this. You had to be, not had to be, but realistically, you had to be middle class or above to live there. Mm-hmm. But there were, to my knowledge, not the typical redlining or racial barriers preventing African Americans or black people from moving wherever they wanted to within the city. It was purposely designed to remove those barriers. So by the time I hit middle school, I'd say, I'm guessing, 25% or 30% of the student body were black, but economically of a similar level to ourselves. So it didn't have the typical tension. that black-white often has. We're talking about early 70s.
Which is often caused by this socioeconomic
Absolutely.
imbalance.
This was like a science experiment almost, and it proved it worked.
Yeah.
So my best friends were of different race, of different religion, and it didn't matter. And not that there wasn't racial tension, but much less so than you would in other cities, if you will.
Sure.
So I remember going back for I think it was my 10th reunion after high school. So this would have been 91, after having lived in Asia for a bunch of years, and making a speech at my high school 10th reunions, thanking my African-American brothers and sisters, saying, you opened my eyes.
Yeah.
Or you forced them not to be shut. So by the time I moved to Asia, I didn't look at Asian men or women as being different in a positive way, but not I didn't look at race as being a barrier. And it was enlightening. But to answer your question, Miami of Ohio.
Miami, Ohio, okay.
Which was the Harvard of the Midwest. That's what we were told to leave in when I went.
That's fantastic. I didn't get that eye-opening experience until I went to university, because I went to the University of Toronto, and we had like 60,000 students across all campuses. And like, I think at one stage, 40% of the student body was Asian. So, you get integrated into life right away with getting to realize, like, my high school, I guess, was predominantly Caucasian, white, and then going to the University of Toronto, it was just like a United Nations of people from all over the world in one place. And it was, exhilarating. Yeah, great exposure, great place to share ideas, different backgrounds, different points of view.
We had Asian students at Miami of Ohio. 13,000 students, right? So I literally... Three. And I met them because I looked for them, because when my father proposed I give up Venezuela and move to Taiwan, I was like, first off, I had to find Taiwan on a map.
Yeah.
Right? The United States education system is horrible about teaching international geography.
Your words, not mine, but I've been preaching that for ages.
And so me as a student born and raised in the United States, growing up at age, I would have been 20 at the time, I literally had to look at a map to, where the heck is Taiwan? Yeah. And then I started learning ROC, PRC, the history of the Kuomintang and the People's Republic. I didn't know all that stuff. So at any rate, and I was a international business, marketing, and Spanish major minor combo there. Nothing to do with Asia. So certainly I wasn't studying that, but wasn't exposed to any of this. So at any rate, once I learned where Taiwan was, I was like, I got to meet some people who've ever been there and understand what I'm possibly getting into.
And I'm at this university with 13,000 people. There must be someone from Taiwan or
there
someone.
Must be a Chinese Friendship Association or something. So literally I found them, and super friendly. One was a white guy who was an expat kid. He grew up in Taiwan. He was super mature, younger than me. He's probably 18 and he's already wearing a sports jacket and carrying a briefcase walking to college. So he looked like a nerd, but he's kind of good looking, smooth sailor. So I was like, dude, this guy's got something going on here. So you could just see that expat kids mature quicker and are more worldly. So he gave me a lot of insight about Taiwan from a kid's perspective.
Okay.
And I met two other students older who were from mainland China who didn't know much about Taiwan, but didn't speak negatively about Taiwan.
Right.
So I was like, all right, I still know nothing.
Because the mainland, I think, really kept the growth that Taiwan went through in the 70s and the 80s. They kept it really like a secret from the mainland Chinese population, because they didn't want anyone to see like, oh, Taiwan has this, we only have this. Like they didn't want that comparative element.
I'm sure. So at any rate, I kind of went over to Taiwan blind.
Okay. So in 86, you graduate
85.
You graduate university. Your dad says, forget Venezuela. Asia's the place. You're going to go learn Chinese. That is some serious forethought.
Absolutely. And I had to have some cojones to accept it as well, which I did. I had nothing. His comment to me was, you have no wife, you have no mortgage, you have no kids, you got nothing to lose. If you fall flat on your face, anybody's going to want to hire you for having the balls to even give this thing a shot in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I went to China when I was 22, because I was just like, I've got nothing to lose. So I might as well just lose it all over there, and I can always come back if I totally fuck up.
So in college, I was a lacrosse player. I ran the Miami of Ohio lacrosse club. We were a varsity sport for a club. We had a lot of fun, but we had good teammates. One of my players' father threw us an end of the year party. And he could see I was struggling with this decision. Venezuela, Taiwan. What do I do here?
Did you just like flip a coin at some stage?
It almost got to that.
Yeah.
And after a couple beer bongs, whatever we were doing back then.
Right.
I was chatting with this.
Did you ever do the one where you hold the can up and you poke the hole in the bottom and you just...
Shooters? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And recently than I should admit. But
last week.
no, it was a couple years ago. And I wasn't as good as I was when I was younger.
Yeah.
So this friend of my father said, Dan, I can see what you're struggling with. I want to recite to you the last chapter, the last paragraph of a book, which I think might be helpful for you. It was an old man on his deathbed, and he called his whole family surrounding him. He called over his youngest grandchild, who was maybe 10 years old. He goes, Jimmy, come over here. And he starts mumbling. The kid couldn't really hear what he said. But the part that everybody heard was, shit, I wish I would have done it when I could have. And then he died.
Oh.
And he says, Dan, just think about that. I was like, oh, fuck. You're basically telling me don't live life with regrets. He goes,
try not to, right?
And just don't.
Yeah.
And this guy was like, don't. Make your decision. It's like, all right, I'm done. I'm going to Taiwan.
Amazing. So 85, you moved to Taipei.
Mm-hmm.
Were you in a university program or a private program to learn Mandarin?
It was private. It was called the Taipei Language Institute, where I had a private tutor for 2 hours a day with probably 5 hours of homework almost per night, three times a week. So it averages out to probably 6 hours in class with 15 hours of homework, pretty intense. And during the time I wasn't studying, I was trying to live as locally as I could.
Okay, well, walk me through that. That's exciting because you show up in Taipei, you don't know any Chinese. I'm assuming you don't have any friends.
I had one contact through my father's business freight forwarding company that he had in Taiwan, an agent, and they assigned their sales director, who had his master's from Arizona State University, he was a decent English speaker, to be my roommate for my first few months there.
Oh, that's good. So you weren't totally
good friends, and we lived together for over a year. Chen Minghe, a good buddy of mine to this day.
Oh, that's good.
So he looked after me. His English was good. I was intensely trying to learn Mandarin. I wasn't afraid of making mistakes, which is rule number one for learning a foreign language is, have thick skin and just whatever.
Just let it go.
Let it go. And
use it everywhere all the time.
Yeah. And be a pest and just keep trying. So I would take the local bus, the 285 bus from my little apartment in Nehu, north of Taipei, down to get into the city where my school was, and trying to communicate with the bus driver and people on the bus. And it's the best way to learn.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what I did. And when I wasn't at school, I would go to that freight forwarder's office. And this is pretty humorous. I would help them translate telexes. Do you remember what a telex is?
Like a fax.
It's like prefax. It's almost like a printed piece of paper that looks like a short message system on your phone kind of communication.
Right.
Where every letter cost money. So instead of saying I would go, you would say I space WD space GO with abbreviations, because every vowel cost them money to send this telex across the world. So I had to translate telexes from English to English.
From coded English to from vowel abbreviated texts, into regular English, so that
with American slang thrown in there.
Right.
To Taiwanese who were well educated, some of them again with master's degrees from U.S. universities, but didn't really get the slang, the lingo, the abbreviations. So I would go in there. They gave me a desk just to help them understand the nuances of some of these telexes back then.
So they're doing like global business on a massive scale, and they're getting all this information coming in on a daily basis through these telexes, prefaxes, and they can't even read them.
They can, but they had to do some guesswork, and they didn't want to guess.
Right.
So I've just helped them out. And for that, they gave me a desk, and they were very friendly to me. They became my first social network. So I'd go out to lunch with them, drinks with them, and they would teach me about Chinese culture, Chinese business culture, and what an exposure that was. It was great.
Yeah. Taiwan business culture is quite different, though, than mainland Chinese business culture.
I would disagree.
Yeah?
Yeah, in a sense that it was perhaps 20, 30 years ahead of the curve in terms of westernizing and understanding global trade. But Chinese are Chinese in a sense of love of traditions. You were teasing me when I first got here that I'm drinking hot lemon tea.
I was. That's such a Chinese.
When I walked in, I wanted to take my shoes off.
Yes.
Right?
I wouldn't let you, though.
You wouldn't let me?
I wouldn't let you.
You're so Western. But the point is, so many of the Chinese cultural norms and values were not lost across the Taiwan Strait.
Sure.
So in that sense, I was exposed to humor. I was exposed to traditions, eating, like don't drink cold water, it's bad for you. Take your shoes off at the door. All these things that do translate in mainland China or Taiwan. And then business values of being frugal, build value in the relationship. It's not so much the business you have in front of you today, it's can you work with that person because maybe you can grow the business together. And it's built on trust.
Yeah, that's a big thing all throughout Asia, actually, whether you're even Indonesia, Taiwan.
Well, I found when I come back to the U.S., I adopted those values.
Oh.
So when I meet people, it's like, all right, I sometimes feel like a foreigner when I come back to America. It's funny.
Yeah. Like if I can trust that person, if I can work with that person, if that's someone that
Trust comes first.
Always.
And then maybe we're not going to make money together, but maybe through our networks we can grow together in some.
Yeah. Networking is at the forefront of everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Relationships. In Chinese, guanxi, it's a very important word.
Guangxi, I think we need to dissect that a little bit for our audience. So guangxi is the term that Chinese people give for that special connection or relationship that can, deliver value at some stage in the future.
Yeah, it's often misinterpreted by foreigners who superficially understand China.
That could be me. I only lived there for 18 years.
Yeah, you count. you know more than most.
Yeah.
Essentially, guanxi, it literally translates into relationship. However, some foreigners were mistranslated as corruption, which it's not. I'll give you an example of American guanxi.
Okay, American guanxi. Here we go.
There you go. You can put this in your new Urban Dictionary. I am trying to court you for my company. I'm trying to sell you a product.
Mm-hmm.
I want to entertain you to build a relationship. I got 50-yard line tickets for the Rams-Eagles game, and I know you're a diehard Eagles fan, which I hope you are because I am. And you're probably Toronto Argonauts or something. At any rate.
Wow, I haven't remembered that for the Toronto Argonauts. Yes.
There you go.
CFL.
So at any rate, I get you great seats. You're on my dime. We're having hot dogs, peanuts, beer, all you want. Maybe we hit a cocktail bar before or after the game. I got exclusive parking. I spent about $2,000 to get this all done today. That's American guanxi. I'm using money, if that's what it takes, to figure you out what you like, what turns you on, and I kind of court to that. So money's part of it, but it's not a bribe. I'm not putting cash in your pocket.
Right.
But I'm arranging a nice dinner. I'm doing things to build our relationship in a comfortable setting. And then I'm getting to know you better. You're getting to know me together. We learn about each other's wives and birthdays and health issues and sports themes, you name it.
Chinese zodiac signs. That's a big one.
And blood type.
Which
TB positive, can't you tell?
I was going to ask for your Chinese zodiac sign, not your blood.
Oh, sorry. I thought you knew what. I'm a Libra on the Western zodiac.
Right.
On the other side, I'm a rabbit.
A rabbit. I'm a horse. Yeah. So
you know what that means?
I have no idea. Someone told me once, but someone was very excited. I was a horse once, and then it wasn't.
But it does matter. In Asia, they really ask that, and they say, okay, which rabbit or which horse? Because it goes on a 5 times 12 cycle. So every 60 years, you're a golden rabbit or a earth rabbit, and it's all different.
It gets complicated.
I don't really follow this.
So you're a student in Taipei for how long? How many years were you there?
I lived in Taiwan for 3 years, 85 to 88, but I intensely studied for just over a year.
Okay. That's a lot, though. Like a year of intense Chinese learning is
It's enough to get me started. To this day, my wife will tease me that for all the studying I did, she wishes my Mandarin was better. But it's compared to other expats in Asia, my Mandarin's good.
Yeah.
It's very conversational. I spent time in factories and I've taught classes in Chinese. I could do all that. But she's demanding, as a Chinese wife should be.
Yes. And they're right there to let you know that it's not quite up to snuff, right?
Which is good. It's a motivator.
Yes. A motivator. I need to get that word down. Perfect. So what do you do after you leave Taiwan?
So in 88, my now wife of 33 plus years.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. That's no small task. We could have a podcast just about being married for 33 years, and
I'm not allowed to do that unless she's next to me. I'm joking. No, we're a very great relationship. It's extremely fortunate with 2 wonderful kids and all that. It's in ideal situations.
That's good.
I could brag all day on that one. I'm willing to do on any podcast you like.
We'll get you back for sure.
Okay. But the point being that in 88, we were dating. We were getting quite serious. And I had started a small trading company whilst I was living in Taiwan, making ballpoint pens.
Of all things, what drew you into the ballpoint pen business?
Back to my father. He was at the time in the logistics transportation industry, having conventions all the time. So he would have 500 to 1,000 people of now called supply chain, then called physical distribution management professionals,
right,
coming to these annual conventions for an organization called NCPDM, the National Council of Physical Distribution Management, of which he was a volunteer industry leader. He was the president of that organization, and he'd have these annual events. Today, as a reference, the organization is called CSCMP, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, of which I'm a member, and I lecture at sometimes. stepping in my dad's footsteps a little bit.
Is that kind of strange for you to have that kind of legacy, or is that something
It's an honor.
Yeah,
A huge honor. In fact, at the last event they had in Orlando a few months ago, I was honored, as was another son of a previous president. We got to stand up on stage together representing our fathers, which is very special.
That is.
Yeah.
It's nice that it stays, that, you didn't drift away into some completely different line of business, and that you were able to kind of fill your father's shoes in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's a big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at any rate, he'd have these big conventions, and there was an advertising promotional product firm that would give them the leather brochure calendars with a pen in it and giveaway items they would give.
Yeah, the goodie bag. The goodie bag. That's the only reason you go for the event. Yeah. The freebies.
So they were doing this as well for other companies, and one of their clients was Upjohn Pharmaceutical, now part of Pfizer, and they had a drug called Xanax. You might know, muscle relaxer kind of drug.
Muscle relaxing, stress, anxiety relaxing.
Exactly.
Helps people.
Still around today.
Yeah.
So in 1986, give or take, they sent my father a ballpoint pen. They said, "You have a son living in Taiwan. Send him over this pen. See if you can find a factory in Taiwan to, quote unquote, knock it off."
That's interesting to me, because so many people, especially who are my age, they understand that China is the big manufacturing hub, and China was the place where people were copying and reproducing things, But actually, Taiwan got it all started decades before China was even.
If you want to go
in
way
that.
back,
We can go way back
to copyright infringement, let's go to United States in the 1800s, how it knocked off British patents.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then go into Japan, knocking off American patents, and then the Four Tigers in the 1980s, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, and Singapore. The Four Tigers came and knocked off Japan. And that's just supply chain shift. And then after the Four Tigers would be China in the early 90s, became the vacuum of the world and just sucked it all in and became the global manufacturer. You could manufacture at scale because there was, quote unquote, infinite supply of labor at a low cost. And it worked until about 10 years ago. What happened? Success. China's middle class started to grow. Cost of manufacturing in China increased. Social welfare tax on companies to allow for maternity leave, allow for people to borrow money to buy a house. Land costs went up. So China became a bit more expensive.
Oh, it did. And you and I were living there through all of this. And we realized rents tripled.
Yep.
Property prices in Shanghai and Beijing quadrupled in over less than a decade.
So if you bought a house in their early stages and you sold it later, you did well.
You did well.
Thank you, my wife, on that one. But the point being that this is a good thing. That means China's moving up the value chain. The people are being pulled out of poverty, it's all positive. But if you just want to go to a Walmart or a Costco and buy decent quality things inexpensively, that means you can't make it in China anymore.
That's true. They've been too successful at what they've been doing, and now they've priced themselves out of the cheap manufacturing market.
But again, this is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. This is something that China on a macro scale wants, as every country wants, is to move up the chain. Stop making cheap items, start making computers and airplanes and more expensive items.
Yeah, and then one would have to argue that maybe that transition is going to be a little bit difficult because of the way the economy is set up, because it's so centralized or so top-down in some way. Do you ever... Because, I worked for the New York Times for a decade, with Howard W. French and David Barbosa and all these guys. We were running around China every week, visiting these manufacturers, visiting the factory owners, visiting the employees, talking to people. And there was always this idea, especially when you and I were there. I was there from 2001 to 2018, 19. And it was always fighting costs. Costs were going up, labor costs were going up. And then, of course, the Social Security net was kind of implemented in the late 90s, early 2000s. So workers had more rights, workers had better pay, et cetera, et cetera. Still not perfectly, distributed amongst all workers, but at least they were trying, to make life better. But I was always worried that transition from producing cheap stuff to producing, higher quality stuff would always be hampered by the lack of freedom within the economy.
I would disagree. China does have its own balance between public sector and private sector, state-owned enterprises and either joint venture or completely private companies. The years I lived there, I never had any issues with government interference.
Were you working for a fully independent Western company, or were you working for some kind of hybrid JV?
My first job, we can jump back to this later if you want to go through the whole chronology of my career. But in 92, I moved from Indonesia to China as part of a joint venture trucking freight forwarding operation with warehousing. And we were doing the inbound work for Volkswagen from Germany and outbound for H&M department stores and handling all the logistics behind that. But it was majority owned by the Chinese government, 4 state-owned enterprises, including Costco and Shanghai Port and China Heavy Lift Truck, and a British company called Inchcape, a big English Hong of a trading company. But it was majority Chinese state-owned enterprise owned. The advantage of being state-owned enterprise was you didn't have the same bureaucratic bottlenecks getting decisions made. Once the company made a decision, no other company would mess with it. They'd let you do your business. Later on, I had my own company making the same ballpoint pen company back in, skipping a couple steps in my career path. In 2005, we moved from New Jersey back to Shanghai on my own dime with my company making pens, which grew into a decent-sized company by this point.
Oh, wow.
As a representative office of a foreign company.
And you still had the main office in Taiwan doing the...
No, but then I shut down Taiwan already because I shifted production up to China.
Like everyone else?
Like everybody. Labor. I was following labor costs.
Yeah.
Essentially, I was free to operate in China without any interference. I never had any issues of government bothering me, and I was dealing with ballpoint pen manufacturers as well as manufacturing other items. Some were Taiwanese owned, some were PRC locally owned companies with no government involvement were able to operate freely. They had no issues. Maybe because they were export oriented and thus deemed favorable by the government. Therefore, the government was hands off, laissez-faire.
Yeah, I think they definitely have a little bit less of a more of a hands-off policy with items that are being not used by Chinese consumers. I think, I think they do have
created jobs and created foreign currency. So it was hard currency. It was good. So I didn't have any issues there with government interference. So anyway, back to your point about value chain growth, I only see it as a natural progression, a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
So now, fast forward till today, for the last 15 years, I'm working for a Chicago-based manufacturer of big bags. These are large woven polypropylene bags, which are quite manually made, a lot of labor. So that's why I had to shift production from China to India about 7 years ago. Now we're made almost completely in India. And I can see the benefits it brings to the country of India with 1.4 billion people, that it deals with a lot of poverty issues. But these are jobs now in India where they're thrilled to take this type of manufacturing jobs, which China's kind of pushing away.
And is the Indian population of factory workers and factory managers, are they up to the task of taking all this new business?
Oh yeah. It's not like they started with zero. India was more focused on other markets than United States for the last 20, 30 years. It was more focused on Europe, for example, or the Middle East, and exporting good quantity of high-end bags, high-end product. It's just kind of new for the U.S. market. So me going over there, we had to do there was some transition in the beginning, whether it's dealing between metric and imperial system, different tolerances. For example, let's say you're making let's say a 3, I'll put it in imperial, let's say a 37-inch bag. And if you make it 1 inch too tall or 1 inch too short, is that acceptable in terms of manufacturing tolerance? Well, in China, it might be. In India, it might not be. So you have to translate those tolerance differences as well, and how we operate and dealing with U.S. banks. There was some transitional curve, but in terms of quality manufacturing, no, India was definitely up to the task.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's good. Yeah, because I know that, like for example, like Apple is moving manufacturing, and Foxconn, the big manufacturer in China that dealt with all the Apple products as well as a lot of computer making for other brands, is opening up factories and locations all around India. So that's very interesting how that's all shifting.
Is really, you need to have boots on the ground.
Oh, you got to have boots on.
Eyes and ears.
Things really slip away.
But it's true in everywhere, right? Even if I'm a California company operating in, let's go back to my college and part home state of Ohio, you don't place an order blindly and just say, oh, they're going to understand everything I say and I can trust them completely. Trust has 2 components to it. One is somebody's trying to cheat you. The other is somebody's incompetent. So you really have to do your due diligence, and that's just business 101.
Right.
And we're dealing with somebody from across the world with a different culture, perhaps different language, although English is quite common in India. It's one of the key languages.
Yeah, it's quite easy to get around in India.
It is and it isn't.
in some places.
I find sometimes my English is not up to par. My American English is like not as sophisticated as the Indian British influenced English.
Did you ever see back in 2012 when I did a motorcycle trip all around India,
Sure
54 days, 14,000
You did one with
kilometers?
your brother.
That was
China.
Yeah, I did China with my brother, and then I did India with my brother again. But India was that broke the camel's back, so to speak. That was a tough one. The roads in India. See,
They're improving. They're improving.
They are improving. They are improving. That was one of the reasons why I was just curious about how, India is managing its logistical development with manufacturing and supply chain stuff. Because when I was there in India for my 2-month motorcycle trip, and you talk to people about the bad roads and the bad infrastructure, it always seemed like it was this cat and mouse game between government and private industry as to who was going to make the road better, who was going to build the better highway, who was going to build the better port. Like
you pay for it. No, you pay for it.
Yeah, it was just they were just pointing fingers at each other all the time, and nothing really got done. And then we're all riding on these terrible roads, very
That
dangerous.
Still exists. The one exception I might make is Prime Minister Modi's home state of Gujarat, which is in Western India.
That one's always been super business friendly, though.
Yeah, it very much is. The infrastructure is fantastic. There's a port there called Mundra, M-U-N-D-R-A, and I've been to 50, 60 container ports around the world, some of the best, right? And I have friends in ocean freight ports, so I get private tours of these fantastic ports around the world. The port of Mundra, I put it in the top 5 in Asia in terms of modernization, the best cranes, the great infrastructure, railroad connection right into the port, very user-friendly and modern.
Amazing.
And it's partly because it's in the state of Gujarat, and partly because it's part of the Adani Group, which is of an extremely successful oligopoly in India with good relations with the Mundra government, with the Modi government.
Right.
So it's fantastic. So I have no problems operating in the state of Gujarat. All around the state, I don't have the issue of infrastructure immaturity like I do in other parts of India or other parts of the world.
Right.
It's quite modern.
Yeah. No, there are parts of India that are shockingly modern, which only make the other parts that haven't caught up yet even more glaring and interesting. But for anyone that hasn't been to India, it's spectacularly interesting, and you're just never bored in India. Like something's always going on, and
You walk out with more questions than answers.
that's a good way to describe it. Yeah. Okay, so you're making ballpoint pens in China.
Yep.
Or sorry, in Taiwan.
As well. Yeah.
But so 88, 89, where
Okay,
were
so
you?
back to that point.
Back to that point.
My company was doing okay. It was roller coaster-ish for a 24-year-old at the time. I had a good year. Wow, I'm doing great. I'm putting some money in the bank. To lulls and valleys where business wasn't coming in. And my girlfriend, now wife at the time, very astutely said, "You're a young man with a great future. If you're ever going to enter the corporate world and give that a shot, you kind of got to do it soon before you become too old and
She's wise beyond her years.
beyond her years." And so I met with a Taipei office of an American flag ocean container carrier called Sealand Service. No longer around. Now it's part of Maersk Line, one of the biggest container ship lines in the world. Met with a gentleman there who took a liking to me, set me up for an interview in the United States, and I got a job almost immediately to go to Chicago as a low-level sales rep, selling ocean freight services to Chicago-based importers and exporters to use our container ships.
So what were you thinking at this time? Like you your father was telling you China's the future. You go to Taiwan to learn Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
You pick up a wife along the way.
Girlfriend at the time.
Eventually your wife. You start doing ballpoint pens, and then you head back to the U.S.
with a very clear agreement with this company, Sealand. 3 years max in America, and then I'll get my ideal expat assignment, meaning that I'll get moved back to Asia on their dime with a company-supplied housing, schooling for my eventual kids if I choose to go that route, country club, full-on package, treated like a royalty kind of job. And that was my end game. And I came to realize through my network of friends who were business people in Taiwan and when I was younger and during my ballpoint pen stage, that if I really want to come back as a proper expat, you got to do your time back in your home country and get sent over. And that's the proper way to do it.
Yeah.
And it was great advice.
There's a lot of people watching, who are watching this who might not really understand what that expat life is because they might not have had the chance to see it or
They don't watch
explain it.
movies?
Maybe they watch movies. Maybe they're just watching the wrong movies. But the differentiation in the quality of life between people that I met and was friends with who had an expat job, who did the time at home with that company, and then went back to Asia and had the country club, had the house, had the IE or the house keeper or the
With an S.
with an S, keepers, multiple driver, the schooling for your kids, which was hugely expensive at the international schools. Like, people don't understand the quality of life difference between people who paid their dues and went over the way you did versus people like me who went over there and were just like struggling to make ends meet for the first 3 or 5 years they were there. Now, struggling to make ends meet, let's make sure we understand this. You could teach English and make a killing and never spend all the money you make.
I've done that. Part of was one of my jobs when I was making ballpoint pens was teaching English.
I think we all do it. I did it for like 6 months when I first went.
I enjoyed it.
It was a great way to meet people.
Yep.
And a lot of business executives were studying English at the time, like in the early 2000s, because they want
you build your guanxi that way.
Build your guanxi that way. You build your friendship. But I could never have a driver. I could never live in a villa with a housekeeper. I could never afford to send my kids to the Shanghai American school or the Beijing American school or whatever. The difference was so massive. And I remember all of my friends had setups like as the expat deals, and it was strange because they would just always pick up the bill, always pick up the dinners, always, because they had an expense account for all that.
Pick you up.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yep. It's like two totally different ecosystems for living.
It's like The Great Gatsby, or right now, I don't know what streaming services on The Gilded Age.
Yeah,
you see how these super rich are living, and it's like, holy cow, they have how many people working? So when we moved in '92 from Short Hills, New Jersey, 92, we lived in Hoboken. We lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, and we moved to Jakarta, Indonesia. We get to this house.
So that was your first expat job?
That was my first expat job, not on my dime, right? But working for a corporation. We get to this. First off, they gave me a extremely generous housing budget, so we basically got a villa, with the pool and just a real beautiful place. And within no time, it was filled with, I think, 7 people working there.
7 people just tending to your house and to your personal and professional needs.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's totally normal. Yeah, everyone. Yeah,
the driver, the security guard for the front of the house. You had kitchen help. By then we had our son born, so we had the nanny, et cetera, et cetera. So it was entertaining involved with my job because I was running marketing and sales for this company. So we'd have dinners at our house. So we needed that help.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people don't really understand with the expat life is like how you are a focal point of the business and the company, and you do need to entertain.
Business diplomat in a sense.
Yeah,
you're representing your country in some ways as well as your company. So to bring people to your house, whether they're your staff or customers, is part of the gig. You're never really turning it off.
Yeah.
You're always on.
Yeah, and the country club membership, and and having to be involved in the international schools and stuff like that. It's all part of the same game.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you loved it?
Oh yeah. It was once it's in your blood, you're not kidding that up. That's too much fun.
So what was it like being in Indonesia in the early 90s?
Fantastic. It was boom years, textile manufacturing, garments and clothing. This, you have to remember, this is during GATT, before WTO. So essentially, when countries would trade with one another, it would be a bilateral relationship. So Indonesia and United States, they would set up their own terms of trade. You're going to export cars to my country, we're going to tax it at 10% import duty. You want to export shirts to my company, we're going to give you not only a 20% duty, but we're going to limit you to 2,000 pounds of cotton shirts per month, or some kind of quota.
Right, and all these countries having these bilateral one-on-one agreements with other countries was hugely inefficient and ineffective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So at the time, Indonesia was doing very well exporting garments to the United States.
Okay.
Garments are bulky. They need container ships. So all of a sudden, Indonesia, mostly the ports of Jakarta and Surabaya, the second biggest port there, just started growing like crazy. So they sent this sales guy from the United States to go over there to explain to the sales and marketing team how to coordinate and cooperate well with our U.S. sales teams in a push-pull type of relationship. That was my initial task, was to share with them best practices on how to deal with these type of customers.
How crazy is Jakarta as a city? I mean, wonderful and crazy. Like just the traffic, the chaos when the weather gets bad, the way the flooding, the way when it rains.
My favorite situation, talking about the traffic, the congestion, they had an idea to put I want to say it's a 3-passenger rule per car to be allowed to get into the inner city. Forced carpooling, if you will.
I like that idea for some reason.
Here's how it really worked. It makes sense on paper. So there'd always be these little boys, 8, 10 years old, who'd be holding up their hands with a one, standing on street corners before they're entering a city. They were basically for hire third passengers. And then they'd work themselves back to that barrier or boundary and do it over and over again, and they'd make a living that way.
That's amazing. Did you ever seen that? I love Larry David, and there's this Curb Your Enthusiasm episode.
Is a blow-up doll sitting in the car?
No, almost as good though. But he's late to go to the Dodgers game, and he wants to ride in the diamond lane, right? And the diamond lane is where you have to have 2 or more passengers. HOV lane, yeah. So he picks up a prostitute on the street corner, and of course, she's this large African-American, proud, hilarious woman. Of course, she's been cast, the characters to be over the top, loud, obnoxious, hilarious. And he picks her up and he's like, oh, I'll give you $100, if you ride with me to the Dodgers stadium. And she's like, yeah, honey, I'll go with you anywhere, right? And then, during the ride, he's like, oh my God, we're saving so much time. This is amazing. You're so helpful. And then she's like, well, where are the tickets and all this kind of stuff? And then she starts like edging in, like she wants to go to the game. And then she goes to the game, and then they end up on the Jumbotron together. And then his wife thinks he's cheating on her. Yeah, exactly. And it was
I gotta look at that.
Too funny. But this is a business in L.A.
Absolutely. No, Indonesia, Jakarta was just a fascinating place. Super friendly people. What I found fascinating was, by then I was already a Mandarin speaker. And although only roughly 3% of Indonesia's population today are ethnically Chinese.
They run so much of the business there, don't they?
It's like 70%, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm dealing now with second, third generation kids of Chinese ancestry who were forced, because of historical reasons, I would have to delve too much deeply into that, but were forced to give up their Chinese family names and take on Bahasa Indonesia type of names. And were essentially mainstreamed into learning Bahasa Nasional and giving up their Hokkien or Mandarin dialects, but they never really did. So meeting me, a Mandarin speaker, Westerner, they were like so excited. My sales staff were all Chinese,
right?
That we would conduct meetings in Chinese, and they were loving it because it was basically getting back to their roots.
That's nice.
Yeah,
cool. That's sweet. Yeah, there's a lot of mystery and strange stories that come out of the Chinese expansion into Southeast Asia in like the 1800s and early 1900s.
Sure.
And
Zhenghe and all.
Yeah, where those people landed, what they did, and how they dominated the business landscape from the very beginning, and basically angered the locals so much that they had to come up with some kind of compromise. In Singapore, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, it's
what often had to do with, and this is true in the Jewish culture as well as a lot of the Arabic cultures, that when you have family members set up in diverse ports, from a Singapore to a Baghdad to a Haifa, that there's a lot of, back to that Guanxi and trust issue, that you're dealing with family members or trusted friends in other parts of the world. So based upon a telex or an email or a fax or a courier pigeon, you get the message from them, you would trust them, and you would let goods trade. Right. And that's one of the secrets to the success of the Chinese diaspora, is that they could cooperate among ports and amongst each other and support each other, both financially as well as just the weekend or spiritually, that they would support each other to grow their businesses.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I remember once I was in Jakarta for a speaking event, and I ended up meeting with a few people to maybe raise some money to do a project there, to make a television show there. And I just remember the best way to get around town was to get on the back of the little motorcycle taxi guys. I was like Gojek or something, and he like a little green helmet.
That's more recent.
Yeah, and it's all connected to an app. It's just like Uber, and you just pick up and a little motorcycle guy shows up, You jump on the back. He gives you a helmet.
I have that in Vietnam to know too.
You hold on tight and you just go for it. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it was the best. And whipping through the whole city, best way to get to meetings.
We had tuk-tuks back then.
Oh, you had tuk-tuks like in India, like little cars.
Same thing. Yeah. Exact same thing. You'd be 2 seats like on a bench in the back. The guy'd be on a motorcycle in the front.
Yeah. And
you'd have curtains if it was raining and you could stay dry. But that's how it existed back then. We didn't have the motorcycle taxis back then.
Oh, interesting. So how was your stint? How long were you in Indonesia? And
2 years. I had 8 offices. So I was traveling all around Sumatra. We had 3 offices. In Java, I had 4 offices. There's 5 offices. We go to Bali for R&R trips, which was great.
I do a lot of speaking events in Bali. Yeah. So
love Bali. Went there on our honeymoon back in 1990.
There you go.
And ended up going there on basically every time we left Jakarta to go on our 2-3 times a year R&R trips. If we wanted to go to Singapore or Taiwan or elsewhere, the Indonesian government would tax us an exit tax. And it was about $100-something a person. It's like, well, why am I wasting my money on that when I can go to Bali and not have to pay the exit tax and have a fantastic 5-star resort?
So if you wanted to organize like an offsite for your company,
yep,
the government would tax you for not staying in Indonesia to have that offsite.
Yes. There was some, I don't know if we really want to, but there were some funny corruption stories we had in Indonesia too. Just hilarious.
I bet. We can save that for another
I could take another round. Quick one though.
Okay, yeah.
So when we moved from Hoboken, New Jersey to Jakarta, it was just my wife and I, although she was pregnant with our son Joey, who came later. We had 2 cats with us in these little portable kennels. We arrived at Jakarta, and the polite way of saying sir in Indonesia is Pak. So this gentleman who was our representative, Pak George, came up to me and said, Pak Dan, we have a problem. Well, okay, Pak George, what's the problem? Your manifest said you had 2 cats, but Immigration and Customs want to charge us 4 cats. I said, there's only 2 cats. He goes, would you come with me, please? Because I saw 4 cats. It's like, what the fuck? So we get down there.
We adopted 2 other cats in mid-flight.
Well, we had a black and white tabby and an orange and white tabby, William and Richard. And we got them each stuffed bears or stuffed toys to accompany them in their kennels so it wouldn't be lonely.
Right, so they can sleep next to them. And
like a pillow,
yeah, exactly.
So the customs people thought they were sleeping cats, but they were stuffed toys. And we were insisting that their cats are sleeping or they died, but regardless, we have to pay. So I took the stuffed toy and I threw it up against the wall and I stamped on it and I ripped it apart. They said, okay, 2 cats.
I was expecting you to say, okay, half price.
Yeah.
three cats altogether. Yeah.
We got away with it.
That's good. So 2 years in Indonesia as an expat.
As an expat. And then I got hired away by this British-Chinese joint venture company to move to Shanghai to but to professionalize a trucking company with 82 long-haul Scania trucks, which was, as I was mentioning earlier, they were doing the inbound movement of cars knocked down, or CKD, of Volkswagen cars made in Germany, which they would disassemble or not completely assemble, ship them to Shanghai to be assembled and thus pay a lower duty to be sold in China.
Yeah.
So that was half of what the company did. The other half was export and doing what's called consolidation, where you take garments from 30 different factories throughout China, bring into a warehouse, and then depending on where it's going in Sweden, Gothenburg or elsewhere, you would load those into certain containers and then export them. So we're doing this warehouse consolidation work for them and using our trucks as well.
It's so interesting how in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, how Shanghai, for lack of a better word, like sucked up all of this like Asia Pacific logistics work. Like I just find a lot of people moved from other parts of Asia like you to Shanghai just because of the investment. They were building a new deep water port there. And it was just insane amounts of growth. And you know, everyone thinks that southern China is the big, you know, port city with Shenzhen and Guangzhou and Hong Kong and the Pearl River.
Which it was.
Which it was. It is. But what was going on in Hangzhou and Ningbo and all around the Hangzhou Bay and with Shanghai and in Shandong in north of Shanghai and all the factories that were in the Yangtze Delta, really.
Yep.
Like that was, I felt like that got developed during our time, and Shanghai boomed because of that.
Well, what's interesting about Shanghai, and you can basically, when it comes to export manufacturing, there's 3 main clusters. One, as you rightly mentioned, not too far from Hong Kong, is the Guangzhou, Shenzhen, southern China manufacturing hub. Eastern China, which is where Shanghai is. Shanghai itself was not a manufacturing hub. It was mostly the province of Zhejiang just south of it, and Jiangsu just north and west of it, and then further west Anhui. That's where the lower cost manufacturing hubs were, with lower cost land. Shanghai became too expensive to set up a factory because the land and labor costs are too high. But the logistics and the infrastructure and the banking and the government support network were there to help grow that manufacturing model.
Yeah, it was almost like a satellite factory or like a bike wheel, right? And all the spokes led to Shanghai.
Precisely right. And up north, similar with Qingdao, and a little bit to a smaller extent in Dalian, those were the manufacturing or export hubs for more heavy industry up north.
Did you ever go to the beer festival in Qingdao?
Oh, yeah. I had a great time.
I went once. It was
muddy and dirty, but great beer. Sometimes we drank beer straight from the Qingdao factory out of plastic bags.
Yeah, the plastic bags, and people are just drinking.
Oh yeah, nothing wrong with that.
That was a little aside. Sorry, I didn't want to drag you into it.
Beer and work go together. It's fine.
So where'd you live in Shanghai? Like, you come from Indonesia to Shanghai. Were you out in Pudong near the ports?
I lived in Pudong.
Yeah.
As you rightly know, Shanghai is dissected by the Huangpu River, and the Pu is used to describe west and east of the river. So Pudong is east of Pudong, Huangpu River. Puxi is west of it. We only ever lived in Puxi.
Yeah.
And
the more fun part, let's be honest. I lived there too, yeah.
I'm partial as well, yeah. But let's let these Pudonkies out of this. So further west, because at the time, Pudong Airport wasn't there yet. That big international airport wasn't built yet.
That's right. It was only Hongqiao Airport, which was in the west.
And I lived very close to that. You wanted to be, if you were an expat working in Shanghai, you wanted proximity to the airport because you traveled a lot. I had to go to Hong Kong frequently, or to the U.S. or elsewhere on business, or within China. I was traveling a lot within China to visit our customers or our operations. So you wanted to be not too far from the airport. So thus we lived, which is now, if you remember the Shanghai geography, where the middle ring road is, that used to be the western edge of Shanghai. And we lived right there when the middle ring road was being built.
Oh, wow.
And later, fast forward to even 5 years ago, we were living in other parts of Shanghai, and it's now much more developed, completely different.
I was always right in the city center. I remember, like, obviously Hongqiao in the early days was the more developed part of Shanghai,
right?
Because all the expats were there. So if you wanted to meet someone for beer, you would go to Hongqiao.
Yep.
If you wanted to go out for a nice dinner, you would go to Hongqiao.
Yep.
Because even the 5-star hotels in central Shanghai were behind what was going on in Hongqiao. And then there was a huge transition to where they just built up the rest of Shanghai.
Right.
And I lived on like Fanyulu and Yunnan.
The French concession area.
Yeah, in the French concession area. And then I lived on Urumqi-lu near Anhui-lu.
I lived right there as well.
Yeah, but when I first moved there was nothing around there.
Right.
You're right. And then all of a sudden I had to go from that part of town, which was considered central, to Hongqiao for business meetings and to meet
Western Edge.
But then after a while, like the quality of restaurants and cafes and designer clothing shops and stuff that would all open up in that area.
Right.
There was this huge kind of shift and transition. We were like right in the middle of it.
You have to be careful to say the former French concession.
Former French.
If you say the French connection, the French concession, you're going to upset people who, in Chinese history, look at the Westerners as being colonizers and disrespectful to the Chinese people, as even being dehumanizing them. So the French were no exception, as were the Americans and the Germans and the Japanese, who essentially occupied China at various points in history less than 80 years ago. And so if you say the word French concession, it's disrespectful. You have to say the former French concession.
Former French concession. Do you remember the Steven Spielberg movie with Christian Bale?
Oh, sure.
When he was the expat kid living in Shanghai during the Japanese
little kid with airplanes flying overhead.
Oh my God,
great movie.
Yeah. But that kind of indicates maybe to our audience like what China was like during those occupations, where the Europeans cut out parts of their city for themselves, and the Chinese people weren't even allowed to visit them. Like, it was totally off limits, which was very strange, which caused all the bad blood and the bad.
Yeah. An interesting side note about Shanghai's history. Back in the late 30s, during the time of Nazi Germany, nowhere else in the world would accept Jewish refugees, even the United States. So they were being murdered. There was one place in the world Jews were allowed to go, and that was Shanghai, because it was a a passport. You didn't need a passport to get into Shanghai. You just need to be able to, from origin country, get on a ship. So about 30,000 Jews from Germany and Austria were saved because of some benevolent diplomats who stamped their passports to allow them to get on these Japanese ships to sail all the way to Shanghai. And they came in as penniless immigrants, and they were able to survive the war years and the Holocaust by Shanghai.
There was one person, there was like a rabbi who helped ferry these passengers into China. Like, obviously there's been a lot of stories, journalism stories about this person, but there was one specific like Chinese rabbi, or
it was a diplomat.
It was a diplomat who was doing it. But yeah, I remember this being quite a powerful story.
There was a Japanese guy, there was a Swiss guy, and there was a Chinese fellow who basically put their lives at risk to basically get the Jews out of Europe. Yeah,
amazing. And the fact that they were able to end up in Shanghai and stay safe, was quite an interesting story.
There's a fantastic museum called the Shanghai War Refugee Museum in Shanghai. It's still there. In fact, it's quite fascinating that
it's on the north side of the river, on the Puxi side on the north.
On the Puxi side,
exactly.
Right.
I remember
Hongkou
district.
And when it was being renovated, this is going back now 17 years ago. My daughter was just turning 13.
Okay.
And she wanted to have her bat mitzvah. And I made a deal with the Hongkou the government to allow us to use the building, which was the Ohel Moishe Synagogue, for my daughter's bat mitzvah. At the very last minute, they had to renege because the renovation wasn't done yet. But they were extremely apologetic, and they invited us back many times later. And I was on the board of our Jewish community there. There's a Orthodox and a Reform community. I was on the board of the Reform community, and they allowed us access to that synagogue on an ongoing basis. Again, back to that Guanxi thing. Because I had developed a relationship with them, they failed to be able to host my daughter's bat mitzvah, and they were very apologetic for that. But they said later on, once we're set up, anything you need, let us know.
Oh, that's
so later on, we went back there many times for our services.
Okay, that's great. So what was it like coming from Indonesia to Shanghai and jumping both feet into the world of China in the mid-90s?
Well, as you rightly said earlier on, the differences between Taiwan and China with respect to development, business-wise, there's a lot of similarities, but Shanghai in the early 90s was very bureaucratic and slow-moving. So for me, I'm a fast-moving East Coast kind of guy. I had to really slow down and build my relationships to get things done. I had ideas on how to grow our company, and what I often found was roadblocks. Some of it was because I was stepping on other people's feet. One of our partners in our joint venture company, some of them had some side businesses which I was learning about, and it impeded our growth as a company and our profitability as a company. So I had to really step carefully to not lose my job.
Yeah, I think that's a great antidote. I mean, because a lot of people go to other countries and expect business to operate just like it does in the United States, or just like it does in the UK or in parts of Europe, and it just doesn't.
No.
And if you don't find some kind of like happy compromise,
right,
you will drive yourself completely insane
and be unsuccessful. So what you really need to do is have your values, your core values with respect to corruption, with respect to labor conditions, whatever those values are. Hold true to those, but where you can adapt and be agile and adapt to the local customs, and you build your new normal. And it might not work in every country the same way, and that's fine. But that's the key to being an international citizen and business person. You have to adapt.
When you arrived, obviously Indonesia at this time in the 90s was probably much less developed than China.
Correct.
Or at least there was less momentum.
Yeah. It was much slower, more broad. It wasn't intense on growth like China was in the 90s.
Yeah. And government sponsored growth.
Correct.
I mean, like they weren't
subsidizing
just
infrastructure, et cetera.
Yeah. They weren't nickel and diming it.
Oh.
They were going with a bazooka cannon to race to the, build infrastructure and
Correct.
build this business.
Correct.
What was it like showing up in the middle of that?
Noisy. There was
construction everywhere,
dust everywhere.
Yeah.
But a gung-ho positive attitude about the future.
Do you remember how hard it was when they were building the Gaoja through central Shanghai?
You mean outside my door? Yeah.
Outside your Fucking door, exactly. Like how loud that was.
Sound of the pillars going in, shaking your whole house. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was in there were two things in China that I really remember. One is just the massive construction right in the city center.
Yep.
Like the way they just redeveloped it. And the second was the Chinese New Year's fireworks and how it was just a free-for-all.
Sure.
Like later on, they banned fireworks and that you could only have fireworks in certain places. And then it was just, okay, government-only fireworks, on the Huangpu River. But back in like the early 2000s, like my friends and I would rent a taxi and drive on the second floor of the Gaojia, the elevated highway. And we would just drive around the ring road for like an hour because we didn't live in a big high rise. We couldn't see the whole city. And we would do that because the whole city and the whole sky was on fire on Chinese New Year's.
A lot of fun.
Every single person would just go outside their front door and just light up fireworks. Yep. So it was so dangerous.
Sure was.
But it was so visceral to my memory of what Shanghai was, and the smell of the gunpowder and stuff like, or the explosive powder in the.
It was full on.
It was full on. I loved that.
With alcohol combined.
Of course, of that. Yeah, you got to have a few beers if you're lighting off fire.
No, they were drinking the White Lightning. They were drinking the heavy stuff.
The Baijiu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, exactly. But China was a positive move for you.
It was absolutely positive. It took my Mandarin to the next level, which was already conversational, but it went a lot deeper by then because I was going into meetings where I was not only the only foreigner there, but one of the few non-Shanghainese at these meetings.
Yeah, and people should know, like the people who are born and raised in Shanghai, they don't speak Mandarin Putonghua. They speak Shanghai-hua. They have their own
both.
They have their own dialect.
Themselves.
Yeah.
Well, they have to learn Mandarin. That's the lingua franca, if you will. So everybody speaks Mandarin, but they additionally speak Shanghainese, which is a business local dialect.
Yeah.
It's written the same way, but spoken completely different.
Completely different. I remember my ex-wife at the time. She was, when she would speak Shanghainese, I'd lose my brain because I couldn't understand even a lick of it.
And you think that was accidental? She was keeping secrets from you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like their own secondhand, right?
Right. No, absolutely. So, but the experience for me was positive in the sense that I learned much more about Chinese business culture, Chinese culture in general. My Mandarin improved. Again, we had the expat type of house. It wasn't as luxurious and spoiling as much as I had in Jakarta, but it was still quite nice. I was treated well, learned a lot from it. But being part of a complex 5 Chinese state-owned enterprise partners with 1 British partner, politically was very complex. Who was my boss? How secure is my job? And I'll just tell you a quick transition out of there. Towards the end, after roughly 2 years, 1 year and 3 quarters, Inchcape, the British partner, had lost a lot of money in Japan because of Japanese yen depreciation. So all the money it thought it made from automobile retailing and Coca-Cola representation in Japan, it lost so much money that it had to basically fire all of its expats throughout Asia, including me.
Oh, wow. So you got caught up in a Japan problem.
In China, exactly.
Yeah.
And here I was with a 2-year-old son, a 6-month-old daughter, and I was like, what the F am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, get back to the Guangxi again, the relationships. Back when I had worked for Sealand in Indonesia and prior in New Jersey and before that Chicago, I had a lot of connections of my uncles, my mentors within Sealand. And I got the job in Shanghai because one of those mentors had left Sealand and was now with Inchcape, who brought me over. Mm-hmm. And then through this uncle network, another one of these mentors had gone to work for a Mexican flag steamship carrier called TMM Mexican Line.
Oh, wow.
Was looking after me, remembered that I spoke Spanish, and called me in Shanghai and said, hey, Dan, I heard you're getting fired. You looking for a job? Yes, I am, sir. Well, first, don't call me sir. Second, you still speak Spanish? Yeah. And he goes, how soon can you fly to Miami to meet me for an interview? I said, next flight. I fly from Shanghai via LA or however I got there to Miami. Show up at the Admiral's Club, and he's already several drinks in. He goes, Dan, sit down, have a drink. It's all right. Have another. Catch up to me. So basically, I'm up this like 6 or 7 whiskeys by this point. And he looks at me with kind of blurry eyes, no names mentioned. He goes, so you want the job? I said, yes.
What is the job?
No.
What is?
I thought about how I should answer this question.
Right.
My answer was, yes. Can I ask what the job is?
Right.
He goes, and he started cracking up. He goes, here's the job. I want you based in Panama, running Central and South America for me, representing the container steamship line to make sure our volumes are good, the ports are run correctly, our container ships are loaded correctly, and representing all of our agents in each country to make sure their needs are taken care of. You're a liaison based in Panama for like 15 countries based in Latin America. You want the job? Absolutely.
Did you also have to set up a tailor shop in Panama?
A tailor shop?
Do you ever know the Tailor of Panama, the Graham Greene novel, I think it was?
Did not have to do that.
Yeah.
So, but what was interesting was, come back to Shanghai, tell my wife the great news. She immediately called all of her antique dealers and rug dealers throughout China, knew I was getting free freight because I'm working for a freight company to move from Shanghai to Panama. And we just went ballistic on purchasing antiques and rugs and filled 2 40-foot high cube containers full of great stuff and moved from Shanghai to Panama as our next.
And then sold them on when you got there, or just loaded up your house and was like, yeah,
2 miles from here. We still have them here today here in West Hollywood.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. But a funny side story. So we're getting ready to move from Shanghai to Panama with the same 2 cats.
Okay, traveling with cats is not easy. I've been doing it too. 2 cats and 2 kids. Yeah, that's no joke.
We're in Hongqiao Domestic Airport. But back then it's International Airport as well. Getting ready to transition. I just came from a meeting. I'm wearing an Armani suit, sitting in business class, my wife and 2 little babies. Chief purser comes to my seat. Mr. Krassenstein, we have a problem. What's the problem? One of your cats escaped. I said, what?
Oh, yes.
Because, can you come with us? So I take my jacket off. I go down. They bring me all the way to the tarmac.
Oh, wow.
And they say, your cat escaped somewhere around here.
Your cat escaped on the tarmac?
Yeah, basically next to the runway.
Like while they were loading the bags?
Certainly somebody had pinched the little door to the kennel. Oh, what a cute cat. How can I? And the cat ran out. So Bill the cat, this is William, and we call him Bill. Bill escaped.
Does he play saxophone too?
Bill did not play saxophone. And I finally spotted him under the luggage carousel on the other side.
He must have been terrified, like an airline.
Full of tar everywhere. So I get Bill, calmed him down, grabbed him. Bill then scratches me like that, rips my shirt open. I'm bleeding. I got tar in my face. I get him back into his cage, take the tape and tape him in there. I tell the people, don't fucking touch my cat anymore. Took care of cat. I come back on the plane. People looking at me like,
yeah, like you just got your ass kicked by someone.
Or I did something untoward and somebody scratched me. And the chief person, hey, you need to sit in your seat. We're late. I said, whiskey.
Whiskey me?
He goes, no, you need to sit down. Whiskey. My wife says to the guy in Mandarin, you better get him a whiskey. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
They got me a whiskey.
There you go.
And then I sat down and flew off. Yeah.
Having a good single malt is a real game changer.
It was like some blended whiskey. I didn't care. I prefer, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got the
blended whiskey's awful.
So you got to do what you got to do. So we get to Panama, and that was our next move.
All right. And I mean, how long were you in Panama for?
2 years. Typical 2-year stint.
Wow. This is interesting to me. Like, I've been doing roughly the same thing for 25 years. Like, I kind of tell stories, I write, I take pictures, I made television, I produced, I hosted, climbed things.
You're an extreme athlete.
Rode motorcycles, yeah. But it's all been in the name of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And now, getting a chance to speak here with you as well, it's all part of the same game, I think. But I couldn't imagine the stress with a family, with 2 kids, even though you're taken care of and even though everything's nice and you got the drivers and the house and everything like that. Just the stress of having to move every 2 years would drive me insane.
It's all about having the right partner. My wife is a superhero.
Yeah.
She essentially, and to this day, blocks and tackles so I can focus on looking good.
That's what you need, right? That's a blocker and a tackle.
It made a lot of sacrifices in her life to make sure that I had my successes.
Yeah, amazing.
She's all about family, and that's what I am as well. So it's a good partnership.
That's amazing. So that allowed you to go out and make things happen.
Yeah, and come home to a great home everywhere I went. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so you're in Panama. You're in Central America somehow. Not a great place for you to keep pursuing and growing your Chinese language skills, but you got your Spanish back.
Great for my Spanish. I had a wonderful time there. I had agents everywhere in Central and South America who wanted me to be happy because I was representing the vessel, the ships. And I wanted them to be happy because they're the ones producing revenue for our ships and making things go smooth in each country. So it was great relationships. I had to be the liaison. I had to be trusted by headquarter office to be their eyes and ears and communicator, and same for the agents in each country. So I was gone a lot. Wasn't very fair on my wife, who at the time didn't speak Spanish. She later had to learn it with 2 little babies. And then, so I think we measured during those 2 years, I was gone 72% of the time.
72%. That's
by going
no joke.
Out of country.
Yeah, out of country. Yeah, well, because Panama's small, right? You can't travel around in Panama very far.
A couple hours into the forest. It was great. Great deep sea fishing.
Yeah. But how stressful was that on your wife at the time?
Stressful, yeah.
Yeah.
And our next move after that, Mexico, was stressful, yes, for the same reasons, because I had to travel a lot.
Yeah. And then after your stints in Mexico, when did you head back to Asia? And under what pretense?
So both Panama and Mexico were with this container steamship line, TMI Mexican Line. Initially representing them in Central South America. Later at Mexico headquarters, I had profit and loss responsibilities for a few of the trade lanes. So then I had to fly to Europe a lot for conference meetings with other competitor carriers to fix pricing and negotiate relationships. And then later, my pen company started growing even more.
Oh, really?
With my father as a partner all these years, we both had these secondary jobs. It grew to such extent that we had to bring on a third partner, and my father wanted to retire. So at this stage, I said to my father, my partner, Dad, you retire. I will get back into it full time. So I quit the container steamship industry corporate job, jumped off the deep end and said, I'm going back into my entrepreneurship again with this partner, and we're going to focus on growing the business.
So after what, like a decade of being an expat, you decided to throw it all away and get back into the entrepreneurial, do it on your own.
Throwing it away,
business.
It was actually that little entrepreneurship had grown to a $10 million a year company, and we were doing great. And I was like, math just makes sense. Follow the money.
Right.
So by doing that, we stayed in, we moved to New Jersey in 99.
Okay.
Short Hills, New Jersey, because the kids had never, American passport holders, and my wife by this time is an American passport holder as well. She got that many years earlier. We decided the kids need a U.S. education for elementary school and a Jewish exposure. So they got to go to the Hebrew school and the religious school and the U.S. elementary school. And we did that throughout their K through 6th grades, both kids.
Okay.
And then in 2005, with my pen company growing, I wanted to watch after the operations because my partner was going to handle the sales, and we divide and conquer. At the same time, it was great for our children who were being split up between Spanish and English and Hebrew classes and football and lacrosse and all these different things going on. And the Mandarin was the one that was really suffering. Other than mother, telling them to shwaya, asilia, and brush your teeth, wash your face. They weren't really speaking much Mandarin. And we tried to get them to go to Chinese school in New Jersey, but it was like Hebrew school. It's too boring.
Yeah, that would have been a tough ask, right?
It was tough. And I remember our son, I think he was probably 8 or 9 at the time, said, Mom, something's got to give. I got Hebrew school and plus, religious school. I got football. I got lacrosse. And whatever other sports he has.
Yeah.
He goes, do I really have to go to Chinese school as well? It's too much.
Yeah. So
we put it on hold for a little bit. But when he got to be 12 and my daughter 11, 2005, if my math is correct, my wife and I made the decision on our own dime to move back to Shanghai.
And that was when I met you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About a year later. We went there, A, for my business, and B, so our kids could get Mandarin fluent before they went to college.
Amazing. So that, and you moved back into Hongqiao.
We did.
Yeah.
Actually, further out. Trying to remember my Chinese geography. It's further west in Hongqiao, in Gubei.
Gubei
area. Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in the day.
And we bought a house.
Oh.
We sold a New Jersey house, bought a house in Shanghai. We took advantage, and we were quite lucky because over time prices doubled, tripled. So it was a good investment as well.
Yeah. I mean, Shanghai in the early 2000s was just on fire.
On fire.
Property wise. I mean, I remember the housing market was so crazy back in the day, from 2001 to 2008, 9. Every year they would have to change the housing policy because I remember like in 2001, 2, 3, 4, it was all the Taiwanese businessmen doing business in China. They would come in and just buy entire blocks
Yep.
of villas.
That's right.
Or entire like floors of apartment complexes, just because it was so cheap, and they knew how it had grown in Taiwan, in Taipei, and they were just spending money on property. And then the Chinese government was like, holy cow, like the Taiwanese own half of Shanghai. Like we need to do something about this. And then they started putting in all these property ownership curbs
Yep.
and mortgage curbs.
You have to hold it for 5 years,
Yeah.
or you pay a speculator's tax.
Yeah.
There's all kind of taxes got thrown in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. And there was just like this massive clampdown on foreign property ownership. And it's funny because that was kind of the beginning of the end of the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always think of China when I was there of being the most capitalist place on earth. Like it was the Wild West of capitalism in a communist country.
Let loose for a while.
Just let loose for a while. I like that. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah. Magic. So what was it like coming back to China under your own business, under your own guidelines, under your own kind of steam?
A love-hate.
That sounds like everything.
Yeah. It was great in the sense that we had our own house. My wife did a fantastic job building. They called it Malpei. You buy this house very raw, right? It might have plumbing and windows you're definitely going to replace. Other than that, it was a cement block.
They used to go so cheap on those windows, didn't they?
Yeah.
They were like,
because they knew you got to replace them.
I know, it pissed me off.
So we spent a bundle, and really, my wife built a fantastic palace for us out there. It was really, really nice with a pool and everything, and music room and everything you'd want in the house.
Mm-hmm.
That was so our home was a castle. It was fantastic. I set up an office blocks from there. I would ride my bike and be there in 2 minutes. The kids went to the Shanghai American School out in Puxi.
Right.
From middle school and high school. They had a great time. My wife, who's also, among her many skills, is a gourmet chef as well, with many different ethnicity type of cooking skills. And she ended up buying into a restaurant and growing it into several locations and a big catering business. So she had a lot of adventure and kept herself quite busy as well. So we all had good stuff going on. It was a good experience.
That's great. And when did that? So that was like 2005, 2006. You coming back and getting connected. I think I met you at a probably a Shanghai American School event or
it was
something
Active
like
Kids Shanghai.
Active Kids Shanghai, yes.
Which is an international schools weekend and after school sports club. An NGO that I was on the board of at the time, and you were a sponsor.
I was a sponsor, yeah, and maybe trying to pretend to do some coaching as well. I can't remember.
Absolutely, we all did that.
We all did that.
Yeah.
So your love-hate relationship lasted how long with China and the pen business?
Well, the pen business went great until 3 years, 2008. U.S. Congress decided that giving ballpoint pens or coffee cups with drug logos on them to doctors was a type of corruption and a reason why U.S. medical system was so expensive, which was bullshit.
Right.
But they
prefer hard cash.
I'm not even going near that one.
That didn't happen.
Can you edit that?
We'll edit that out.
So, so essentially, this multi-billion-dollar a year industry, where not just doctors but hospitals, et cetera, were giving Trotsky giveaways, was cold turkey stopped.
Yeah.
So I had to quickly, because I had a house mortgage, 2 kids at the American school. I had costs.
Yeah.
I had a monthly nut I got to take care of.
This is what I meant by kind of giving up that security of the expat job and kind of like going off the deep end, because you never, like, when you have an expat job, they're always going to, take care and send you back home, right?
At minimum. Yeah.
Right. But when you have your own business, when you're hustling and the government changes a policy that in overnight kind of wrecks your entire export model, you're fucked. You have no safety net.
I was fucked. So what did I do? I was already quite involved with the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. I did a lot of pro bono work with them, and they had a early stage jobs website. You have to be a member to access it and advertise on it. And I saw a job placement exactly when I'm starting to look for a job that said, wanted, Westerner who speaks Mandarin, who knows supply chain. I'm like, fuck, that's me. So I contacted the number, and a fellow answered the phone. I described who I was. He goes, how soon can you come downtown to the Four Seasons and meet me for coffee? I said, I can be there in 2 hours. Get down there, met the guy. He goes, you're perfect. We want to hire you. Would you talk with the owner of the company on a Skype video call tonight? I said, sure. I get on the phone with this guy. He goes, are you the same Dan Krassenstein who raised all that money for the scholarship fund for Ethiopian Jews in Israel? I said, yes, I am. Because I have a passion, and that is anything related to education or anybody, disadvantaged youth, combining that with running marathons, which I was doing at the time. I ran 10, and I would always combine the two. So double dip ice cream cone, right?
Yeah.
Try to stay in shape and raise money for people who don't have a chance, especially children in education or disadvantaged youth. So I raised a lot of money. And he learned about it. I'm Jewish. He happened to be Jewish as well, the owner of this company. He goes, how soon can you come to Chicago? And I said, next flight. So he bought me a ticket, flew me up back, and I called him up. I sent him an email. I said, do you mind if I swing via Philadelphia on the way to Chicago? I'll pay for the airline difference. There's an Eagles game, and I'm a diehard Eagles fan. He goes, dude, I'm a diehard Bears fan. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll pay for your flight ticket change. Go have a good time.
That's sweet of him. Yeah.
And then
very nice.
Got to Chicago and got the job, and I've been working for this company for 15 plus years now.
Oh, wow. So that was the next transition.
Yeah. Great timing. Yeah.
Yeah. Great timing. It's interesting to me the way that you just, at least the way you're describing it is you just kind of made decisions to do things immediately. Like, obviously there was cost benefit analysis, and obviously you're very intelligent, and you've had all these experiences already with changing jobs, moving countries, et cetera, et cetera.
It's having the right partner who supported me.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like, having the right partner, but your ability to just be like, yeah, I'll meet you today. Yeah, I'll get on the next flight. Like, most people need weeks of warming up to even consider that
decision to be made. I had liabilities.
Yeah.
If somebody's offering me a job, it's like, how quick can I get there?
Yeah. No, it's, it can be incredibly scary. So 2005, 2006, right? You're back in Shanghai, you're doing the pen business. Your pen business gets killed by the U.S. government policy dealing with doctors and free giveaways. So then you land this shipping job. So how much longer are you in Shanghai?
It's not shipping. This is actually
manufacturing.
So I went from making pens to making bags.
Right.
These are the cubic foot size, the big white polypropylene woven bags you see sometimes at construction sites or on farms or at mills. Mm-hmm. So these are the ones that hold 2,000 pounds of powder with the 4 loops at the top that a crane or forklift can move around.
Oh, wow.
These are called bulk bags, or technically flexible intermediate bulk containers, FIBCs. Woven polypropylene bags, also called ton bags or bulk bags or super sacks, all the same thing.
All the same.
So the company I work for now for the last 15 years is one of the largest U.S. importers of this product. It's never been made in the U.S. It's always made overseas.
So when you went to Chicago for that job interview, the job was in the U.S.?
No. The job specifically was in Shanghai.
Okay. They
wanted an expat based in Shanghai to look after their operations there and grow their operations.
So you went back on the expat drip.
Yeah, I'd call it quasi because it's a small, medium-sized company. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as luxurious as a big corporation would be, but it was generous, and I was happy to have the job.
Okay. And how much longer did that keep you in Shanghai? Because now we're sitting in Los Angeles, and you and I both are no longer in Shanghai.
I could be in Shanghai to this day if I chose to, but essentially, it just didn't make sense to be there anymore because, as we were talking about earlier, with cost of labor manufacturing our product, a labor-intensive product using heavy-duty sewing machines, the product is still made in China today, but a bag today in China would cost you $10, would cost you $6 in India. So you
really, that 40% markup difference, just to get the China stamp on it.
Well, it's worse than that because that's called FOB value, origin, ready to put on a ship value versus likewise in India. Mm-hmm. You still have to get it to the United States and you still have to pay the U.S. import duty. And under former President Trump, he added an additional today 7.5% duty on top of the normal 8.4% duty. So Chinese goods were already 40-50% higher to make in the first place. On top of that, U.S. import duty made it even more cost prohibitive.
Right.
So I started shifting more and more of my production to India that was capable and fully willing to make the product. It got to the point where me being based in Shanghai didn't make sense anymore.
Because you were exporting to the U.S., and if you weren't manufacturing in China, there was no reason to be in Shanghai.
Legally, I could have stayed there. Yeah. Chinese government welcomed me. Nobody was kicking me out. But for the company's dime, it wasn't logical. And for myself, it was quite expensive living in Shanghai, and there was no reason to be there anymore.
It's funny how Shanghai got so expensive. Like, I remember showing up in 2001, teaching English, and my buddies and I, we could make we could make like a couple thousand US dollars a month teaching English.
Right.
And I was doing it part-time. So I was doing like evenings and weekends. And I had a deal with the lady that ran the educational company that every once every 2 months I would disappear for 10 days and go trekking, hiking, climbing, someplace or do some photography somewhere. So she was kind of accepted that I was always gone. But my buddies and I, we lived in a massive apartment. There were 4 of us. We each had our own like en suites, but the rent was only like maybe $300 a month. Like we would go out every night. So this was before like the 5-star hotels came in with the expensive restaurants and the expensive bars. But we would go out every night for dinner and drinks, and we could not spend all the money we had.
Go to
we were
Big
taking
Bamboo and Windows and all the fun places.
Big Bamboo, Windows, great. Before all the the clubs on the Bund opened up, right? That was that kind of mid heyday we were in. But then and then over the period of just a decade, like it just became prohibitively expensive to do anything in Shanghai. It was shocking.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So it got to the point, both for the company's sake and my own sake, that it was expensive to live there. And there was no reason really for me to be there. I have great staff, which to this day, I still have an office, a wholly far-known enterprise office in Shanghai with 2 of my staff still working for me, helping me manage my India manufacturing.
Amazing. And what year did you come back to the motherland?
4 years ago.
Okay.
So we owned a house here. We had a condo in West Hollywood because our kids later, after they got their Mandarin under the belt in high school, they both chose to come to LA, our son at USC and our daughter at Scripps Women's College, part of Claremont. Both came to LA County for undergrad. And we had, by this time, sold our house in Shanghai and immediately bought initially had a condo, then we upgraded to a house a couple miles from here in West Hollywood. And so I had a house here. I might as well live in it. So we decided to relocate back to the U.S. We never lived in LA before.
And what year was that?
I think it was like 7 years ago.
So it'd be like 2017, 18?
Maybe even 16, something like that.
Yeah. Did you feel like, so I was an entrepreneur in China.
2015, pardon me, 8 years ago.
2015.
8, 9 years ago, yeah.
Okay. So as an entrepreneur in China, someone who kind of went there and made his own way, I really felt a chill to the way foreigners were treated in China towards the end of my stint. So let me lay this out for you. I'm very keen to have your feedback on this. So when I first arrived in China, 2001, 2002, I was teaching English. Then I was doing photography with the New York Times, and I was doing some writing and photography for some other magazines, traveling widely, completely freely. People always helpful, sweet, compassionate, hospitable, all of the above. And I would say all of that, carried on right up until about 2015 or 16. And dare I say, it was a lot with the changing of the guard, with Xi Jinping coming to power in China. It started to feel like, anything to do with foreign business, anything to do with foreigners in China became just harder. Like it was hard to open up a bank account, then it was hard to open up a company or expand a company. And it just felt like there was this massive like Chinese first push. And I feel, at least in my era, all of my friends and I had left, by 2018, 2019-ish, because of that great chill that we kind of felt. And then, of course, COVID accentuated that departure, because a lot of people left during COVID and haven't gone back. And I have friends now that go back to Beijing and Shanghai, and they're just like, there's no foreigners there anymore. Like everyone just, fucked off.
Nothing you said is incorrect, but I think it's way more nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit chicken and egg and cause and effect.
Sure.
Don't forget what was happening in the United States at the same time with the populist Trump era of America first, the MAGA bullshit. I won't get too political on you, but
we won't have to get too into it. Yeah,
I'm not a fan of that. But essentially, who fired the first shot in terms of nationalism and me first? I would argue more came from the U.S. side.
I think
it was reactionary on the Chinese side.
I think that's fair when you look at China-U.S. relations. But I mean, this kind of chill that we were feeling in China as foreigners, I mean, I feel like it came it came from Europe. Like it was directed at Europeans. It wasn't just directed at Americans or Canadians. I felt like it was kind of like pretty wide of.
Well, part of it, I don't disagree with you, but again, I think it's a little more nuanced. That part of it, other than the reaction to what happened in the United States and our Western allies who went along with the U.S., China certainly was trying to do the divide and conquer approach. That carrot and stick. You want to play with Trump? There's a stick. You want to work with us? We'll buy more Airbus. We'll buy more Mercedes. We'll drink more of your champagne. So it's definitely a commercial carrot and stick. But at the same time, you also had the Chinese people now economically doing a lot better. Middle class had grown. Certainly pride and nationalism then comes to the front. It's like, you know what, we don't need these foreigners as much as we used to.
Localization,
which is
of C-suites. Yeah.
Same thing happened in Japan. I mean, it's not unheard of what happened in China. That is to say to the foreigners, you're certainly welcome to do business here, but we're not going to kiss your ass anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if it was an ass kissing situation, but it was definitely like a chill that was kind of brought
think
down.
about it again from the Chinese perspective. You have these foreigners here who have a history of colonization and disrespect. History
over a century ago.
Chinese have long memories.
We all do. We all should.
And then you go into modern day, and taking a pragmatic look of the foreigners living here. Are they bringing value? Are they bringing certain Western concepts and ideas, which are contrary to the Communist Party of China, the single government party running the country? Are they bringing us competition? Are they bringing us value? Are they spoiling our hold on our people? Do we need to kind of lower them down a peg a little bit and let's focus more on internal? And again, I think that's a natural progression.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a natural progression, but it was definitely, I think it's pretty easy to argue like nationalism under Xi took a step up.
100%.
Yeah.
But I'm more getting back into the why.
Yeah.
Part of it was reactionary to what happened in the U.S. first. Part of it is just a natural growth of we're at the table now. We can stand up again.
How happy or lucky or sad do you feel that you were not in China during COVID?
Thrilled.
Yeah.
We
dodged a bullet.
We did. Our son, who was working for Nike Shanghai at the time with his girlfriend, they went through a big piece of it, and it was tough on them. They got out just at the last minute.
Did they?
Yeah, before the heavy lockdowns.
You know what happened? This is a slight tangent, but I got to tell you this. So, one of my best buddies in Shanghai, he was working for a massive U.S. company, and he was working in Shenzhen, and he's one of these guys. Grew up in Hong Kong, expat family, very intelligent. Went to University of Chicago, spoke fluent Chinese, Caucasian. And yeah, he taught English with me in like 2001. So we've been friends forever. But I left China 2018, 2019. He was still there. So he was down in Shenzhen working, and his family, his wife and 2 kids, they had this kind of tradition where the wife's family and the husband's family were both U.S. based. So they would go and see one of the families for Christmas.
Right.
So they would fly from Shenzhen all the way to the U.S., see one of the families for Christmas, and then the wife and the kids would stay because there's not a lot of work between Christmas and Chinese New Year in China, which we all know because we live there, but not a lot of other people know that. So the wife and kids would stay between Christmas and Chinese New Year, and he would go back and work, and then he would come back for Chinese New Year. So there was less travel on the kids and stuff like that. Well, he went to the U.S. for Christmas in 2019, end of December, and then he went back to work.
Oh, shit.
And then China locked down for COVID.
He couldn't get out.
And he couldn't get out. And he didn't see his family for 5 months. And obviously there's horror stories of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But his escape out of China was crazy. So he went back to work, and then they was like, okay, just stay at home and work. And he did that for like a few months. And then he was just like, fuck this, like, I'm getting out. So he sold all the furniture, gave back the apartment. The company rented the apartment, I think. And then he had to take the train, I think, because flying was a pain at that time, and the train was easier. And then I think he took the train from Shenzhen up to Shanghai and got on one of the diplomatic flights back out to the United States so that he could be, with his wife and kids. And I think that whole process was about 6 months-ish. and by far not the worst story I've heard, but that was just, something that happened to one of my best friends.
It was tough. It was a challenging time because you have to know, again, back to the Guanxi word. I was involved with a diplomatic effort with the U.S. consulate there, and I got a heads up about the lockdown coming.
Oh, really?
I won't go into any details there.
Yeah.
So I called my son, who was planning to come back with his girlfriend anyway on a trip to the U.S. And I said, Joey, get on the next fucking flight. Don't ask me. And they did. And they got out.
Oh, wow. That is lucky.
Lockdown hit the next day. Yeah. I think he got to the airport about 8 hours before flight time, and they were just like, we made it to the airport. And he just stayed at the airport.
Yeah, don't leave the airport. Whatever happens, just don't leave that airport. Yeah. No, it was crazy. I was in the Simeon Mountain National Park in Ethiopia.
Fun.
On March 19th when the Western world closed, basically, because obviously China had closed many months before. But
right.
Because I was sitting in Dubai, I left China in 2018, 2019 and moved to Dubai because I was traveling like 300 days a year making television. I felt like Dubai was just an easy place to be.
Sure.
Great airline in the middle of everything. And then COVID hit, and I was just like, well, everyone's freaking out about COVID except people in Africa.
Right.
So I was just like, I'm going to go to Africa for a few months and just film, because they're not going to close borders in Africa. But because Africa stayed open, other countries closed their borders to African countries. And then when the world closed, it was really hard to get out of Ethiopia. And when I left Ethiopia, there were only two countries I could go to. One was Canada, because that's my passport holding country. They have to let me in. And then the other one was Turkey, because Turkey kept their borders open. And I was working on all these projects in Saudi Arabia at the time. And I was like, well, Turkey's almost the same time zone. Yeah. At least I can kind of keep up on these projects I'm working on. Because at the time it was 2 weeks. We're going to close for 2 weeks. We'll see where we are in 2 weeks.
And Istanbul has some great.
Well, all the restaurants were closed. So it was just me rescuing cats. And that's a whole nother podcast and a whole nother story.
Back to the cats in Indonesia, my story. Yeah.
Exactly. But I was there for 4 months in Istanbul, just like twiddling my thumbs, losing my mind.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Love Turkey. I went mountain biking there a few times.
Yeah. Speaking of logistics and supply chain. So let's get, now that we know more about you, and thank you for being so candid and open.
I didn't talk about my daughter yet.
Oh, okay. Well, you want to get
a plug for you.
Okay, go.
So she's 29.
Okay. She's
lived in Netherlands the last 5 years. She did her undergrad here in California, then did her master's at University of Utrecht, and loved it over there.
Utrecht is beautiful. I played a rugby tournament there once.
You played rugby?
I did, yeah.
That's my son's passion, rugby as well.
And we had an epic 3 days in Utrecht. Yeah, beautiful.
College town. You feel like you're in it's a Harry Potter kind of scene, these old buildings. At any rate, finished her master's there, and she got hired by the Klingendale Institute in a joint venture they have with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the Knowledge Platform for Security and Rule of Law.
Wow.
Which is essentially if I'm saying this correctly, Melissa, don't get mad if I get it wrong. It's a three-way partnership between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Netherlands, the Klingendale Institute, which is a think tank, and essentially academia, where they try to coordinate policy on good governance, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
So that's what she's done for the last several years, working out of The Hague. And so that's where she's at now.
Okay.
Little side tangent there.
No, that's beautiful. That's great. I mean, how proud are you to have a daughter who's thinking globally like that?
Absolutely. Game changer.
Yeah. And because you dragged her all around the world, too. I mean, you know what I mean?
A big part of her being who she is today is being so chameleon-like with languages and cultures and ability to understand everybody's perspective and find a happy medium. Yeah.
It's so interesting, and it's so true. Like, if you can land boots on the ground in some far off place that you've never been and just be like, yeah, okay, here we go. Let's just get to work. Then you are so far ahead of so many people who have this, fear of the unknown or fear of other people or fear of people that don't speak your language.
I was just going to say, to your point, a couple months ago, she was tasked with going down to Nairobi, Kenya to put on a conference. Mm-hmm. She'd never been there before. Yeah. But she had spent time in South Africa, so she wasn't afraid of the continent. She did a semester abroad there and later filmed a documentary down in Cape Town as well. So she was comfortable in the continent of Africa, but never been to the country of Kenya before.
Sure.
As to go down, she killed it at the great conference a couple months ago, just because she's able to get there and just figure things out.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, picking up on the nuances of people and how to do business and how to motivate how to get things done, and yeah.
Giving off positive vibes so people know you have goodwill about you.
Right. Here, just like you do.
I try. I learn from my kids.
We're all trying. But I would love to spend the next little bit here
Plugging my book.
Oh yeah, we can do that. What do we got here?
So I only wrote one chapter in this book. I don't already hold this. You want to hold it?
Yeah, it's just, well, you can hold it like that. Camera's on you now.
Camera's on me.
Yeah.
So essentially, you can buy this on Amazon.
Selling to China. Stories of success, failure, and constant change.
So Kerr Gibbs, a good buddy of mine who was past president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. Now he's with the University of San Francisco. He edited the book, and he reached out to 8 or so individuals who have a lot of experience in China, and one of them dealing with electric vehicles, one of them dealing in law, et cetera, with a variety of different backgrounds, different industries, and wanted to write a book about what it's like to do business in China. Because today you turn on the news and it's primarily negative news in the Western media about China, China.
Everywhere, all the time.
This book is a pragmatic, not a glorified panda hugger book by any means, but it's more true experiences of what it's like to do business in China.
Wait. Panda hugger?
Yeah, panda hugger means whatever China says is good, right? And America's bad, China good, which is bullshit.
I love that though, panda hugger.
Same the opposite.
Yeah.
The U.S. is no angel either.
No.
But both sides have their pros and their cons, right? So this book is more about pragmatic stories and experiences and sharing of business experiences to expose people to what it's really like to do business in China in many different industries. So I was tasked with writing a chapter about supply chain.
Oh, brilliant.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun doing it. We went through several versions of it. And the final name we came up with for my chapter, I want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah, please do.
Even though I'm not wearing glasses, but I can pull this off. Chapter 8. China-U.S. supply chain, pragmatic relationships, and laissez-faire.
Okay.
And that says a lot about who I am as a global trader, that the less government interference, the better.
And how, and so what do you mean? Like just on a tax basis? Like the less, yeah?
Essentially, I care about the producer and especially the consumer. Think about your typical John Smith who has a blue-collar job in, let's say Gary, Indiana.
I can be John Smith and I have a blue collar as of today, but not in Indiana.
Not in Indiana.
Yeah.
And you're worried about making ends meet, covering your costs, healthcare, and all these other things going on. And you want to be able to afford Christmas gifts for your kids, whatever your thing is. You feel inflation.
Oh, yeah.
You're the one most impacted as opposed to middle class or wealthier class in America. It's always the worker who is the one who's most impacted by inflation.
Absolutely, yeah.
When governments get involved and add taxes and put up other barriers to trade, bottom line is it makes goods more expensive.
What about just raw materials going up and supply chain of raw materials increasing the costs of production in factories in China for goods for the U.S.? Like
that's true.
Yeah, I mean there's so many variables. That's why your job is, in my eyes, impossible to manage, because you guys are looking at so many different things, guys and ladies. You guys are looking at so many different things on the logistics and supply chain front. At any one time, any of those things could, increasing your output cost by 10%.
Well, that's just it. And we were joking that before today's webinar or podcast, or you call this interview, that
television show, Dan.
Television. Hello, America. That I had 250 something emails I was going through. That's my everyday.
Mm-hmm.
So every single day I wake up 6 something a.m., take out my iPad, and it's like, all right, I have 6 different email addresses for different things I'm involved in. But for my work, I got those emails I got to go through to just get a feel for, all right, what's good, what's bad, and what's hot. And then there's challenges. Every single day is a new set of challenges. But that's what supply chain is all about. And you put the word global in front of it, it's just a whole new set of variables. So if you have
a global set of variables, like millions and millions of potential, there's millions of potential connections and infraction points that could make your day miserable.
Perfect examples are, Enrique, I'm sure you want to jump into this, talking about the Red Sea crisis with the Suez Canal and how that affects John Smith and Gary, Indiana. Because of that, And because of now the longer transit time to move goods from India to the United States, for example.
Around the Cape of Africa, around the Cape of Good Horn, right? Which increases the journey by up to 2 weeks or something like that, which
like
can...
15, 16 days, right?
Yeah.
And cost, and more vessels at play. But what you don't think about is these ocean containers, of which you get like 7,000 or 8,000 of them on a typical container ship. You need X times more empty containers to be situated around the world to handle those longer transit times. So now what we're faced with, going to get a little bit logistics technical on you here.
Okay. I'm loving
You have to have
this, by
enough.
the way.
You need enough empty containers at origin where you need it at the right time to load the goods into it. Well, if those containers are now sitting on ships, taking a longer transit time to get to North America or Europe, and they have to return back there, it doesn't make it back in time. So you need to build more empty containers to have them where you need them. Right now, we're starting to feel, we're running out of containers.
So right now, the bottleneck is not necessarily what's going on in the Red Sea, and we'll get into that in a second. And it's not necessarily that we have a shortage of ships or captains or
Correct.
crew. It's that we actually don't have enough containers to to fill up and put on the ships at the right time in the right place.
Correct. That would say that's one of many variables that we have to keep an eye on, and it all comes down to agility. One thing I like to explain to people who aren't familiar with supply chain, and I said this to our suppliers, our factories, our ocean carriers, our freight forwarders, our quality control inspectors, we're all part of the same chain. My product, our bag, which we're selling to a large U.S. company, for example, they don't really care about who's involved in my whole supply chain. They just care that we delivered the right product at the right time at that agreed to price. They don't care how.
Fair enough. Yeah, the rest of it's up to us, right?
Behind the curtain is my problem.
Mm-hmm.
So if along the way I had a delay because there weren't enough empty containers sitting at the port where I needed it, they don't care. They just know I was a week late.
Right.
So I'm only as good or as strong as the weakest link in my supply chain.
And now as a producer of these plastic bags, you can change your supply chain partners along the way.
You have to.
Yeah.
Nonstop. And that's why I go to India 4 or 5 times a year, constantly reviewing who our suppliers are. And the point I wanted to make earlier about the weakest link in my supply chain, that's how weak I am in front of our end user. I just have to be I don't have to be perfect, but it has to be better than our competitor's supply chain. So my competitor, who's also an importer of these same polypropylene woven bags, probably made in India, they have their own set of freight forwarders and carriers and quality control inspectors. Maybe we do, but I don't know if they do. And suppliers who are making the products, right? And they're buying the raw material from somebody else, the polypropylene raw material. We all have our own supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
Mine just has to be better than theirs.
And cheaper or more efficient.
Cheap is a word I would never use, because at the end of the day, Chinese, as you might know, have the expression, 便宜不一定是便宜.
Mm-hmm.
That means cheap isn't necessarily less expensive.
That's true. Yeah.
So it has to be the whole delivered product, of which price is a key factor, but not the only one. And one thing I learned, I did my master's in global supply chain management at University of Southern California Marshall School of Business. Plug out that one of my favorite classes was learning about the project management triangle. Okay. There's 3 points to a triangle: cost, time, quality. And every single purchase order has to balance those 3. Something's got to give. It's hard to get a perfect bullseye right in the middle of that triangle. So client by client, project or order by order, you really need to analyze and say, what's the driver? Is the client just looking for the cheapest product out there, and it could be late and it could be the wrong color? You know that. Fine. Focus on price. Is the client only like quality driven? It has to be the perfect specification, or the bag might break, or they're so concerned about their PMS, Pantone matching system, color of the bag and their logo, and that's part of their spec. You have to get that spot on. They're willing to pay more money for that. Or it's a drop dead delivery date, and timing means everything, and they're willing to spend more money. They're willing to give a little bit on the spec. Okay, that's the driver. Normally it's a combination of those 2 or 3 to make that happen perfectly. Those are the decisions that a global supply chain practitioner has to make every single day.
And that's what you're making. Those are the decisions you're making every day.
Yeah, and I don't make all the decisions. I often will go to my headquarters with my counterpart who's dealing more with the customers, who's more in touch with the true driver of that order, and share my my analysis of this situation. We have 3 solutions to this. something's got to give to make it happen. What's in the best interest of either our margin on the order, our delivery date, or the quality spec, or what does the client really want? Let's be transparent with the customer so they can be part of the decision-making process. And that's what it comes down to. You have to have situational awareness of what's happening right now, which didn't go to plan. What are your options? How agile are you? And what are the best solutions?
So, I mean, so you're sitting in LA. It's 2020, and China shuts down because of COVID, and you've got factories closed, you've got shipping lines closed, you've got ports closed, you've got crew and, stuck on boats that they won't allow to be onshore because they haven't been tested or whatever. And you're sitting in your home office in LA going like, what the fuck is going on?
No.
How did you manage that?
Not at all.
To walk me through that.
Agility. We were quite fortunate. I'll take all credit. Thank you very much. But it was more luck than anything and timing that I had already transitioned a lot of our production to India. We still had China manufacturing going on, but I had the ability to make the exact same bag to our spec, to our price need in either country. So this just expedited our shift from China to India during that COVID period.
And what about the shipping lanes and the logistics companies and how they were dealing with that? So you dodged the China bullet, but obviously there was global contagion around COVID.
Oh, there's COVID in India too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it wasn't draconian as a response as China did in India. In China, you have a lot of federal control of the entire country of PRC. In India, you have a lot more state control, more like the United States in that sense, that certain decisions can be made state by state. So within India, there was a lot more state-driven decision-making on how to deal with COVID. And fortunately, I had factories in various parts, north, south. India's a huge country.
Massive.
And very diverse. And they don't necessarily like one another in different states as well. Which is
there's a lot of camaraderie. That's why the cricket is so popular in India.
Sure.
The 2020 cricket,
they really 20 cricket.
I love it.
Love it.
Yeah, I love it too.
I went to a match in New Delhi and saw the Delhi Daredevils against the Calcutta Knight Riders. They don't sell alcohol within the stadium because they're so passionate about their sport. They're nuts enough as it is.
Yeah, it's really wild.
We tailgated in pregame beforehand and had a great time.
That's great. Yeah, no, India's special.
It's like baseball in 3D. It's so much more fun.
It is. And so much more fast.
And cheerleaders.
They do have cheerleaders.
Yeah.
And all the Bollywood stars own all the teams. So, hey.
A lot of fun.
They're going to take care of the cheerleaders.
So anyway, back to COVID India.
Right.
So what I was able to do was shift production within India, depending on what was going on that week with COVID, between Gujarat or Tamil Nadu or West Bengal or Karnataka. I was able to shift production around. And I was doing every other day and minimum weekly, sometimes even daily, head counts on sewing workers who were showing up to each plant to make sure I was aware of their production capacity better than they even were.
Because the less workers that were showing up at the factory, the less bags that would come out that day, the less stuff that could be shipped, right?
So the way you look at it is how many, because the sewer is within a production of our flexible intermediate bulk containers, the sewing worker is the bottleneck. Other parts of production, from the extrusion and the weaving and the lamination and the cutting and the printing, that is semi-automatic. It needs workers, but a lot of machines can do a lot of that work. You need less workers, and they tend to be ahead of production. They're ahead of the curve. The bottleneck, where things get slowed down if you're missing a worker, is the sewing portion of the tailors, they call that. So by counting the number of workers, each worker can sew 30 or 40 bags a day. You're down one worker, you're down per shift 30, 40 bags. And you just do the math and you realize, they're telling me they're on schedule, but the math doesn't make sense. So I had to really get into the factory's production foreman's mindset of what their true capacities were and doing the math on how soon they can complete this production, because I'm not their only customer.
No. And how forthcoming were they about this kind of information? I mean, because obviously, if a factory wants to put their best foot forward and bring on more international clients and stuff like that, they don't want to start telling you that all their staff have COVID and they've got to shut down or something like that. That's devastating.
100%. So it comes down to you only want to deal directly with the source information. No trading companies involved. You have to deal directly with the factory. And that's always been our policy. Trading companies are the devil because they lie, cheat, and steal, and they keep information from you to keep you as a customer, like a hook.
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want you to go. So no trading companies. You're dealing directly with the source of the factory workers. So what I quickly learned was, sure, they're going to put the shiny paint on it and make it look like everybody's there. But when I would catch them at lies, I would give them a warning and say, look, you realize we're one of the biggest importers of this product in North America. And if you lie to me once, shame on you. Lie to me twice, shame on me for letting you lie to me twice.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get 3 strikes with me, you get 2.
Right.
So I would just be very blank. Fourth, and here's our purchase order. We got a lot more dangling in front of you. It's something you want. You want these purchase orders?
Mm-hmm.
Don't screw me on this one. And if you do have a shortage of workers, prioritize mine over my competitors.
Sure.
So basically pit them against each other. And I spent a lot of time with boots on the ground because we have QC inspectors there in India who would report back to me not just the quality of the product, but how many sewing workers are there really?
Yeah.
So I had my espionage going on there to really give me firsthand accounts.
Like this is so important though, because so many massive Western companies have been caught out doing stuff in countries like Bangladesh, for example,
Yep.
where the workers aren't treated very well or paid very well. And these QC inspectors, even sometimes were taking bribes from the factories
Sure.
to relay poor information back
Absolutely.
to, and people don't even know what's going on in half these places.
Yeah, that's another facet to what I do for a living, and that is corporate social responsibility, or ESG. And now they have these certifying bodies like EcoVadis and SEDEX who are attempting to be transparent and international and setting up standards on workers' rights and clean conditions and no child labor, no prison labor, proper exhaust fans to get the fumes out of the factory, all these type of things. And these are things we take extremely seriously because we have blue chip customers.
Mm-hmm.
So part of my job is to make sure we don't have any embarrassments in our supply chain. So
It's crazy how important that is, because you're dealing with public, like especially for you, you're dealing with clients that are publicly listed. If stuff gets out that some of their products are being made, products that you're supplying are being made in terrible conditions, that, it hits them, it hits their stock price, it hits their business in ways that they definitely don't want to have to see any of that happen.
I would say that's half of it. The other half is myself as a professional.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 60 now, right? I'm going to work, another 10 years? I don't want to have an embarrassment that I want to be able to look in the mirror when I'm brushing my teeth or shaving and not feel shamed. I want to feel like I'm a global trader. I don't want government involved, but I don't want to take advantage of people. I don't feel good about myself. I don't want that dirty money. So part of it is my own pride as a professional to make sure we are doing business the right way, that there aren't children working at their factories, there aren't prison labor, that the work conditions are good, that the workers are paid for overtime, that we don't take shortcuts. So part of it is my own pride as a professional. Part of it is, we have blue chip customers who really want to see we're doing the right thing.
Yeah. And so, okay, so
it is possible to do that in global trade. It is possible.
So one thing I'm very interested in is, okay, so the factory that you have decided to work with is producing these bags. And then that just seems like half the battle. The other half of the battle is
finding the right supplier.
Finding the right supplier. The other half of the battle is getting them on the right boat, on the right
you're talking about
track.
COVID.
Yeah, during COVID, or even just now, like obviously with the issues that we're having now, where we started COVID and then bring it up to where we are today. It's just, today's crisis. I just feel like every couple months there's like a shipping and logistics crisis somewhere in the world. I mean, we had COVID, then we had that one guy that got like spun around in the Red Sea, or
it was an evergreen ship. It wasn't a guy, it was a ship. It was a guy on a ship.
It wasn't a guy who took up the Red Sea Canal. It was a ship that got spun
in the Suez. An evergreen ship went sideways and it blocked the canal.
Yeah,
and that was only like 5 days.
But it was crazy the influence that had. And then of course now we've got Houthi rebels, in Yemen, firing missiles and weapons at shipping containers and ships going through the Red Sea, which is insane. I mean, like, how does this affect your decision making on a daily basis?
Great question. I'll go back to what I said earlier.
Agility.
But that was part of it.
Agility.
The other part is my supply chain just has to be better than our competitor's supply chain. Everybody is impacted. Even if I'm doing a perfect job, how are we impacted? The cost of freight has gone up. To move a 40-foot high cube container from a port of Mundra in Gujarat to New York, I'd say 3 months ago, 3.5 months ago, 102 days ago, was probably around $2,000. Today, it's over $5,000.
So to me, that's insane. So how do you manage your margins and how do you manage your client expectations when your cost of shipping doubles?
More than doubles.
More than doubles, yes.
First off, put it in perspective. I'm just going to use very simple, rough numbers, so no competitive secrets are being stolen from me here.
Of course. I'm just curious in the ballpark, the macro understanding of what you have to do.
As I said, the FOB value, the freight free on board, or the origin cost value of a finished bag at origin port, let's say on average it's $6, leaving India. You get about roughly 6,000 bags in a 40-foot high tube container. So the difference of $2,000 versus $5,000, $3,000 amortized over 6,000 bags, that's 50 cents a bag of a difference over a $6 bag. So you're not talking about the landed duty paid delivered price to your customer doubling or more. No, you're talking about about a 20% impact.
Mm-hmm.
So keep it in perspective. It's big, but it's not like the whole thing had doubled in price.
Okay, that's good to understand. Yeah,
perspective. It's gone up, but only a piece of it.
No, because the shipping cost is not the whole cost.
That's the whole point.
Yeah,
and depending on what product you have, it's going to either have a greater or lower impact. If you're dealing with gold, they don't care what they spend on freight because it's such an insignificant component of the delivered price.
Mm-hmm.
If you're dealing with toilet paper, it has a much bigger price and big impact, and we're kind of in the middle.
Right. So the cheaper the product, the more impact.
Exactly, and bulkier as well.
Right.
Right. So first off, it's the freight. Second off, it's not like you always have to go for the most expensive ship. Again, go back to my project management triangle: cost, time, and spec or quality. If it's going to stock inventory, it's not urgent to get the container to destination, Gary, Indiana, again as an example, by a certain date. You can be a month late and the customer doesn't care in this example. You don't have to pick the most expensive container ship. You could pick a cheaper one, which maybe has a transshipment, meaning that a relay, that it's going to ship from Mundra, but then it's going to go to Colombo, Sri Lanka, and be discharged from that vessel, and then go for the next vessel, which sails 5 days later, much cheaper. It's kind of like flying Southwest versus United Airlines, right?
Yeah, where you're transiting versus flying direct.
Exactly. Same is true in logistics. So there are less expensive options, but it takes much longer period of time.
So let's say you have these bags in Gujarat in India, and you're shipping them off from India, and you're like, okay, bags, see you in New York, in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever it takes.
But we track them like you track your DHL package carrying your medicine. We watch them carefully.
Yeah, GPS, satellite coordinates, guaranteed. But let's say and of course this is actually really poignant. This point is because you leave Gujarat, India, which is on India's west coast, which is close to the Horn of Africa,
mm-hmm.
and you're going through you're going past the Arabian Peninsula into Yemen, through the Suez.
Into Yemen, hopefully.
Sorry, around Yemen.
Thank you.
Through the Suez Canal into the Med, and then out, towards North America,
right.
Probably, instead of going around the Horn of Africa, which adds 15 to 16 days.
Right.
So let's say like your shipment is a day away from passing the coast of Yemen. They've just left India.
Right.
So 2-3 days are on the road. They're just about to pass, the Horn of Africa, go in between Somalia and Yemen.
Correct.
And then head up into the Red Sea through the Suez Canal. And they're a day away from that moment. And some boat gets attacked a day in front of them. News filters down. And the captain is like, fuck this, we're going to take the Horn of Africa, add 15 days.
Yep.
They can make that decision and cost you a massive amount of money, and they can make that decision without even informing you. And obviously your client is then they're stuck 15, 16 days waiting for their stuff, and it could be more expensive because of that extra fuel and that extra time on the boat. That's what boggles my mind.
What you said is spot on accurate. It affects everybody, and your knowledge of geography is impressive. Thank you very much. Nice to talk to somebody.
Thank you. I grew up abroad as well.
Well, you got your Canadian geography education we don't have in the United States, so at least you know global maps. Most people don't.
Yeah.
Shout out to U.S. educators. Teach more geography.
Teach more global.
Shout out.
Anything.
My daughter taught me that. Something that a lot of her German friends do.
Yeah.
Instead of saying shout out to the teachers, they just say shout out, and then you say to whom, and they want you to figure it out.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Yeah.
The Canadian teachers.
Yeah.
But back to your point, the
I went to a public school too, by the way. I want to throw that out. I did not go to private
Does
school.
public school in Canada mean the same thing as in the U.S., or is it more like England, where public means private, private means public?
No, it's exactly the same as the U.S. So in Canada and the United States, we have a public school system, which is government funded, and then you have a private school system, which is privately funded. But in the UK, it's the opposite.
Right.
A public school is a private school. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Anyway.
Wow, that was a tangent. Okay, back to logistics.
No, but you brought up the right point. It's not the fact that going from Mundra to New York via the Cape of Good Hope, under Africa, if you will.
I love the way you just threw in the Cape of Good Hope. Great. Another great geography point. Yeah.
Been there a couple of times.
Yeah. Past the island of Socotra.
Exactly. When our daughter was living in Cape Town, we went down to visit a couple times. Beautiful area.
Yeah.
Went to the Rugby Museum in Cape Town. It was really cool.
Oh, nice.
So the point is, going from Mundra to New York via the southern route, let's say on average you're looking at 35 days. Via the Suez route, on average, 23 days. So you have an extra, on paper, 12 days, but it's more realistically 15, 16 days differential. It's not that one takes longer, one is shorter, because you can plan for that by speeding up production or by transparently talking to your customer and giving them realistic ETAs.
Right, because if you speed up production and you're getting stuff out of India 15 days earlier than you would normally, then it's a wash. Yeah, you're even, Steven.
It's hard to do that. You only want to do that by exception, because you can't treat every purchase order as an emergency. Otherwise, it's like crying wolf to the factory. It's like, I can't everything. Pick and choose which ones are urgent. I'll be happy to help you.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't be every single one. Otherwise, I'm running full staff 24/7. It's not fair to me. So you pick and choose. You work with your factory. You're transparent about rush these orders, slow down these orders, and I'll make it up to you by giving you more POs as a reward.
So you're just constantly playing chess, and you're just constantly moving pieces around the board, trying to...
You can. And you have to have those, back to Guanxi, you have to have those relationships of trust with those factories for them to trust when I say, help me out, I'll help you out. Scratch my back, I'll scratch your kind of things. So again, forgetting about even the production time, let's say you didn't have the production speed up opportunity and you're looking at 22 days versus 36 days. As long as you're transparent with your end users about updated ETAs, far enough in advance, normally they say, that's fine. Thanks for letting us know we have enough inventory. Or fly in one pallet or two pallets and we'll be fine.
Well, flying in is exponentially more expensive, isn't it?
But only one pallet, you're talking about $1,000, $2,000. A whole container being flown in, yeah, you're talking about 50 grand, 100 grand. But just where it's needed, you have to have these type of detailed conversations with your customers. They realize what's going on. They read the news.
Well, it's in the news every day now. It's crazy.
And again, you just have to be better than your competitors. So if your competitor is not having these conversations with them and they're just delivering late, you look like a hero for being transparent about it and on top of your game.
Mm-hmm.
The problem, as you just rightly mentioned, is that when that captain decides, whilst they're already through the Red Sea, almost at the southern end of the Suez Canal, to turn around and go on, then you're wasting time and it's not been predicted or planned for. That's where problems happen. And that does happen, but these days, most of the ships, the decision's already made before it left Mundra. Which way am I going?
So things aren't happening like in the last sense of that moment. But ships are still going through the Red Sea Canal, the Suez Canal right now.
I got 3 of my ships going through the Suez right now with French military protection.
Wow. Walk me through that. So the Europeans, I saw something about the Americans and the British trying to protect their ships.
They're not alone. There's 5 other partners, Netherlands and a couple other countries that are with us.
So how are they protecting the ships?
So I don't know. I'm not.
Are they putting a little guy at the front of the ship like with a gun? Are they using helicopters or planes or satellites or?
I think it's all that, as well as probably, I don't know if this is true, but I suspect they're probably having conversations with the Hutu government.
The Houthi rebels?
Are they rebels or are they the government? I'm not sure.
No, I think
so. They're running Yemen though. They were off the terrorist list. Now they're back on it again.
Well, that's how you know. So the government of Yemen disintegrated several like a decade ago, basically, and lost control of huge parts of the country to the Houthi rebels, who are sponsored by the Iranians.
And the Saudis were sponsoring the existing government.
And the Saudis and the UAE.
Yep.
So the UAE government, because I lived in Dubai for several years, and there would be days like where you would hear that there was conflict escalating in Yemen. So it's only because I was near the actual hot point that I know this. But yeah, so the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates, the Emiratis, they formed a coalition with the Yemenese government to try to stabilize the situation there. And they've been in it's been like a 10-year civil war, and it's been a forgotten war. Like no one really knows what's going on. It's kind of like what's going on in Syria. Like everyone knows there's still conflicts and there's still action going on every day, but no one really knows what's going on until someone from the Houthi rebel group starts firing missiles at
It's
ships.
another proxy war on the world stage.
It is, and it's terrifying because, like whether you're dealing with, oil and gas prices that double, over the course of 3 months because Russia invades Ukraine,
right,
or whether you're dealing with Houthi rebels in Yemen because the Iranians aren't happy with what's going on in Israel,
sure,
and we're just going to start, causing trouble elsewhere. And you're sitting there going like, what am I supposed to do with these ships and these containers? But everyone's doing this. Like Apple is doing this. General Motors is doing this. Like the biggest, most powerful companies in the world that move stuff every day are struggling just the way you are in trying to manage all of this risk.
You kind of got to be like MacGyver, and you have to.
Richard Dean Anderson, Canadian,
shout out, shout out. But you have to kind of love the game of managing chaos to do what I do.
Okay.
Managing chaos, right?
Managing chaos in real time.
Absolutely in real time, or ahead of the forecasting it a little bit too. The Chinese have a character, if I'm going to get this correct. Trying to remember it correctly, but it's opportunity through chaos is what it comes down to.
Oh yeah, the more chaotic the moment, the more cracks in the in the facade, and you got to find your path and
finding your path, taking advantage, and again, just being better, faster, more accurate, more transparent than your competitor. Nobody's going to get it perfectly right. But again, back to your question about Mundra to New York via the Southern Route or via the Suez, as long as you know in advance and you communicate it to your clients, you can manage it.
Okay.
There's other crises out there. There's going to be more. But what I find very interesting is I'm involved in a lot of supply chain conferences. The big one actually happens once a year, typically the first week in March. Will be this March 1, 2, 3 in Long Beach. It's called TPM.
Well, now I'm going to have to go because I learned so much from you.
It's fascinating. You do have to go. It's a lot of fun. It's good parties too.
Okay.
It's in Long Beach, and it's at the convention center there. Once a year, all the big ocean carriers, the freight forwarders, the big importers like ourselves and exporters as well, we all meet there and talk about the hot issues. And for the last couple of years, it's been great because they brought in speakers who are geopolitical analysts.
This is the whole way the world is going now. You can't run a global business unless you have these advisors or analysts that can tell you, like Yemen at the edge of the Cape of Good Hope,
yep,
where all, where 17 or 18% of global shipping traffic passes is controlled by terrorists, and they just want to cause trouble and launch missiles at ships.
But that's just it. And I'm going to sound like a sage when I say this, so I'll blow my own horn a little bit.
Okay.
There's a great online newspaper, which my father turned me on to 40 years ago, back when it was a paper newspaper, called the JOC, the Journal of Commerce.
The Journal of Commerce.
So it's JOC.com.
JOC.
Shout out. My friends over there. They're the ones that put on this TPM conference.
Okay.
And it's owned by a British firm. I think they're American now, called IHS. British or American, I forget. It's a combination of the two. So essentially, they realized the intersection of geopolitics and global trade, that they affect each other, obviously. So for the last couple of years, they brought in these geopolitical experts to give everybody heads up on hotspots. What's the next crisis? Ever since COVID happened, everybody's like on edge, like, all right, what's next? Is it going to be a cyber attack? Is it going to be, which they did have.
And we call them a black swan event, right?
They are
and they're starting to happen more often, and it's kind of getting crazy. Like we just don't know where we can turn next.
So it's basically be ready for what? I'm not sure yet, but be ready. And that's what we deal with. So that's why, where was I? I'll tell you exactly where I was. I was in India, and I was at a city I hadn't been before. Oh, I was in Silvassa, India, in an area between Maharashtra and Gujarat, like in between. There's a federal-run territory there, which was Portuguese until 40 years ago, that territory. And so really nice. Sitting by the pool there, writing an article for the Journal of Commerce, because I write for them just for fun sometimes. I just get some glory out of it. They don't pay me. No shout out.
No shout out. No shout out on the no payment.
And so I wrote this article, which they didn't print. They had me revise it. But it was then that I predicted the Red Sea crisis and the Suez Canal situation going through right now.
And how long ago was that?
I wrote that in November.
And what kind of things had popped up in your radar that would give you that sense that something was going to be like a hotspot in that area? Because Somalia was an issue for like a decade for the
But that was
terrorists.
more terrorism and hijacking for along the coast going southbound or coming out of the Red Sea going southbound, because you could have gone closer to Yemen through the mouth of the Red Sea. And there's a point there where it's very close from both sides. And it was more oil tankers,
Right.
that were getting hijacked on the Somali side.
Higher value targets. It was at what was the movie with Captain Phillips with
Tom Hanks?
Tom Hanks. Yeah,
Great.
Beautiful. Yeah.
That was a MER ship, actually, I think I remember correctly.
Oh yeah.
A container ship.
Yeah, because like 10 years ago, that was before COVID. That was happening all the time.
Sure.
And then COVID happened, and no one talks about it anymore. And now the Houthi rebels are just taking pot shots at massive ships off the coast.
But I knew this was going to happen just by reading the news, but being on top of geopolitics, which is a hobby of mine. And like, I can't get enough of like BBC because they cover more global geopolitical events.
Yeah.
And now with YouTube TV, I can get BBC T News every hour. It's great.
Yeah.
But so being on top of it, reading in JOC, reading other current geopolitical magazines and newspapers on a daily basis, and I'm making a strong effort to do so, there was enough indications that the Houthi rebels were going to do what they did.
Right.
There had already been one or two shots fired, but nothing that serious. But I said, no, this is going to get out of control. I can see it already.
And that was November. So that was after the Israeli attacks. So you could
start the attacks on Israel.
The attacks on Israel.
I'm quite partial. We don't have to go there. Quite partial on that one.
Of course. Sorry. The action in Israel at the time. So that was in October
7th.
Right. October 7th. So by a month later, you knew the Houthi rebels were going to get up to something in Yemen.
Yep. And I knew if it wasn't the Houthi rebels, it was going to be somebody else. But the Suez Canal and the Red Sea being in crisis, to me, was clear. Just as clear at the same time, the Panama Canal, and you can argue an even more important crossroads for U.S. international trade than Suez is. Just to put it in perspective, if you think about how much Asia-produced product or Europe-produced product going either direction through the Suez, that's way more impactful for Europe than it is for the United States.
So walk me through this, I read just today, actually, I think it was like 18% of global trade goes through the Suez Canal.
12%.
And the Red Sea, 12%.
I'd say 12.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah.
And what is it for the Panama Canal?
Probably double that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But think about where Suez sits and where Panama sits. For U.S. product, U.S. and let's throw Canada in there too, North American products, either import or export, Panama Canal plays a much more important role because the cost of moving a container of product made in China, which is going to New York, you could ship it to L.A. and then go by rail from L.A. to New York.
Which is what your father would have preferred back in the day.
Yeah, as a railroader, absolutely.
Exactly.
But so today I'm going to pick a number from the air and say that rail crossing is around $2,500 from LA to New York.
Okay.
Sometimes more than the ocean freight part. Going through the canal, amortized over a ship that has 6,000 containers on it, maybe it's only $700. So to get to New York, it's a lot cheaper to go through the canal.
And what about time? Is it faster to go through the canal or faster to jump on a train in LA and end up in New York State somewhere?
On paper, the train should be faster, but the reality is it's darn close because you have a lot of congestion at the ports and the rail hubs.
Right.
They don't play well together always. It's not as integrated as our U.S. infrastructure sucks.
And just last year there were strikes at the ports. I remember like there were boats outside of the Long Beach port.
That's all resolved now.
That's all resolved now. But there were strikes and it was like weeks of backup.
It's ILWU on the whole West Coast,
yeah,
from L.A. all the way up to Tacoma. But that's all resolved now. The next one's going to be East Coast and Gulf. Will be the next series of strikes potentially in the next couple of years. They take turns.
You see that as being
that's down the road. I'm forecasting here. That's going to be the next shout out. That's going to be the next issue is ILWU on the East Coast and Gulf.
Yeah. And do you see any other international hotspots popping up along the way? I mean, we always have. There's the Straits of
Malacca Straits.
The Malacca Straits, which goes between Indonesia and Singapore. That's a hotspot. And there's the the Gulf of the Straits of Malacca. That's
the same one.
That's the same one. Straits of Hormuz.
Yep, that's up on the
Persian Gulf area, right? That's Iran have been attacking.
Anywhere.
The Iranians have been attacking some small ships
I
there.
would say, I mean, when you talk about hotspots, think about, you really have to go back to, I don't know, call it 75 years ago. What happened after World War II? And sorry to get, I digress a little bit.
I love it. Take me back.
The end of World War II, the U.S. was the last standing power that had money. England had been, but they went broke, and the U.S. kind of stole hegemony from them. So U.S. took over in terms of being the world's cop, if you will, because it had the strongest Navy. It had the military wherewithal to essentially tell the world, look, all you European powers, give up your colonial possessions. Open up your borders to global trade, and I will do the same. I'll give up my global possessions, Philippines and elsewhere. They kept Puerto Rico, but they gave Philippines up.
Right.
I will use my Navy to protect global trade. You don't need to have big navies anymore. Be a free trader. I will open up my borders to your products at low tariff costs, no low import duties. I will consume your products. I will help you rebuild your economies. Look how strong Germany and Japan became in the 50s and 60s because of that policy.
Right. It was like the reordering of the world almost.
Totally. The Marshall Plan and essentially the New World Order, which U.S. sponsored by opening up its borders to global products and using its Navy to protect right of passage and free trade and free shipping around the world. Everybody won if you played along with it. But then you have the Soviet Empire or Soviet Union / Empire who didn't want to play. They're like, we don't want to play your game. We want to do it our own way. So they cut themselves off from global trade. Now fast forward till today. Some cracks are showing in the modern version of the Roman Empire, the U.S. Empire, that certain players, and we can certainly say Iran, North Korea.
The old axis of evil. No, but that was what George W's term,
or Batman, one of them, and certainly the former Soviet Union led by Russia and North Korea. These are the countries that they stand to gain when there's chaos. When the U.S. hegemony is under threat, they have a chance to distract their own population from inside how poor their lives are within their own countries.
Right.
Distract them for whatever reasons by pointing their fingers and blaming the U.S. and being the sheriff around the world for causing all the troubles. That they're unfair to us. They're calling us shithole countries. They're treating us like that. So right now, that's what's going on. So think about who stands to gain by this existing world order being broken up. Would certainly be Iran. Certainly would be Russia. And North Korea to a lesser extent because they're smaller, and perhaps Syria, one of Iran's stooges in the Middle East. So you're going to ask me, where's the next hotspot? It's probably going to be caused by one of these countries, but it doesn't necessarily have to be with a ballistic missile. It could be a cyber hacking. So will there be a major cyber hacking event affecting world trade in the next 6 months? Fuck yeah, there will be. It's already going on.
And from Iran, from Russia, from North Korea, or from China, probably, which are the bigger kind of hacking terrorists.
I think so, because they stand to gain by having us be in disarray. Us versus them kind of thing. These kind of cyber hacks are already going on, already disrupting trade.
Sure.
So that one is probably the low-hanging fruit, most obvious. I'm not revealing anything that's not already known.
Like how susceptible are these massive shipping lines, these companies like Maersk, for example? We can use them just an example because that's the only one that just jumped in my head. How susceptible are they to like a cyber hack, and what would that do to tracking of all of their ships globally? Like I wouldn't even know. Like obviously the ships will still be sailing, I guess, because they're self-contained units and they're propelling themselves through the ocean.
Well,
but all the tracking and the logistics.
They certainly have, if they're, and I have to believe this is true, otherwise they're fucking idiots. They have to have plan B, plan C's, and contingency plans built in.
Sure.
Right? That not if we get hacked, but when we get hacked. Are we backed up every single day with a mirror information protected somewhere in a vault? Right? Do we have our gurus who are checking every email to make sure you have to educate your staff about phishing attacks and all these different ways bad guys have a way of infiltrating your computer systems? That's going on today.
Right.
So every one of these companies have to have plan B, plan C, contingency plans. There's been situations in the last year where container steamship lines have been hacked or have had situations where they cause chaos, where container ports that has happened to as well. So it's already ongoing. I'm predicting it's going to get worse. There's going to be situations where they get more clever than we are, and they have a new way of screwing up our communication grid.
Right.
That's happening. That's an obvious one. The next one that was more disrupting for world trade would be another pandemic, which is very predictable.
Right.
And I don't think it's caused by a human on purpose. It's more ineptitude or just us versus nature. There'll be another pandemic. Hopefully we've learned some lessons from COVID.
Yeah.
We certainly didn't from 100 years ago, from the Black Plague or 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
These things will happen, us versus nature. There will be somebody messing with a monkey somewhere in Tanataraja and then brings it back to humankind, and we're all in trouble again.
Right.
So we have to plan for these type of things. The whole point is agility. What happens when that happens? What are you going to do about it? How ready are you for the unknown?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what global geopolitical experts and global supply chain people think about all the time is, how agile am I? What are my plan Bs? Perfect example, what's going on in the Suez right now and going under the Cape of Good Hope with the longer transit times. Well, what's my plan? That's my plan B. What's my plan C? What if that doesn't work? I could certainly ship cargo to the West Coast of the United States, pay the money, and still deliver on time to a Chicago or New York.
Here's a question. What do you think, where are you with these northern passages with the receding ice sheets and the receding glaciers and stuff like that, of being able to, leave a Shanghai or a Japan and go above Russia along the North Pole, to Western Europe or to North America?
You mean global warming is good?
No, I didn't say it.
No, but essentially, think about it. I'll go back 20 years ago when I used to fly from Newark, New Jersey to Shanghai. We would take the northern route. And that didn't exist 50 years ago. That was more technology and ability to fly planes in colder weather over the North Pole to get more efficiently from one part of the world to the other.
Yeah, anyone that lived in China and was doing regular trips to North America, you go right up over Alaska, right up over the North Pole, the whole flight. It's beautiful. Yeah, I was the best.
But this with container shipping, it's just essentially, it's going to happen. With or without global warming, they're going to develop ways to transit, they're already doing it, container ships over the North Pole to get there more efficiently, if it makes sense. Where there's a will, there's a way. They'll figure it out. It comes down to, is it cost efficient? Is it time efficient? Is it safe? Yeah, I think that's absolutely going to happen. That's more opportunity as opposed to threat to world trade. That's more of an alternative route.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe it's more efficient to do it that way. Maybe it's greener because maybe it uses less carbon to be able to ship that way. So
maybe the Houthi rebels are cornering the market. Are cornering the market on icebreakers.
Listen,
and then they want to get rid of the whole Red Sea Suez Canal option and make people buy their icebreakers so that they have to break the ice. I cartoon books. No, I'm just thinking, who wins from forcing ships to take different routes, right?
Yeah, probably one of the outcomes post-COVID with global trade is what we call nearshoring. It's interesting. You have onshoring, which means moving production back to the United States if it was ever here in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's often through automation and through 3D printing, that you could move some manufacturing that was in China before to the United States. That's onshoring. Friendshoring is what's happening with India, because today India is the United States' friend in global trade and some geopolitical issues.
Wait till a few more years, it'll change again. They're in and out, aren't they, all the time?
I'm not going there.
Not there?
So that's friendshoring. Then you have nearshoring.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Mexico has been the big winner. So much manufacturing has moved to mostly northern Mexico to take products destined for the United States market. It could be the key component was actually made in the United States, at minimum designed here, made elsewhere or made in the United States, shipped down to Mexico for final assembly, and shipped back to the United States duty-free under the new NAFTA or U.S., Mexico, Canada, what's it called, USMCA?
The one that Trump renegotiated during his presidency. Yeah, the USMCA. Yeah, that was like 2017. That was like one of the first things he did, right?
Yeah, it was. I don't know if it was any better, but he took credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the point being is Mexico's a big winner of nearshoring. So one thing is clear, with all the variables out there in global trade, nearshoring is the winner. And it's going to be, and I'm predicting in the next 20 years, there's going to be more regional manufacturing to serve regional markets to reduce some of the variables, to reduce some of the risks.
So here's a question. So you're making bags in India and let's say they're $10 each.
Six.
Well,
10 was China.
right. 10 was China.
Simplify your math. Okay, go ahead. $10 in India. I'm with you.
I'm trying to simplify my math. Let's say they're $10 a bag in India, and that includes shipping them from India to New York.
Okay.
Okay. So what is the cost increase of doing that production in Mexico?
Great question.
But not having to worry about the shipping and the increased logistical threats that might occur, and having more control over the timing and delivery.
Your question is spot on. Great question.
My mom's going to be so happy.
That was great. It's actually the question of first quarter 2024 or last quarter 2023 is A plus B comparing C. So A meaning cost of manufacturing, B meaning cost of logistics, C meaning delivered price. And they have to throw in there not just the dollar amounts, but the risk costs as well, and variables and all that.
Yeah, because the unknown risk of shipping around the world right now is massive.
Absolutely. And you can take on risk, but not for 100% of your production, for a portion. It's kind of like investing. You put 10% in something real risky because it might pay off, but 90% is kind of conservative.
So you put 10% through the Red Sea, you put 20% around the Cape, you put another couple in the air, and then you ship the rest to LA.
Something like that. But with your question from Mexico, I'm going to use very, very rough numbers, and I'm probably off by a bit. Let's use origin cost versus origin cost, break it down by components. The bag made in China today is $10.
Okay.
Origin cost, no logistics. Vietnam is probably $8. India is $6. Mexico today is similar to China. I'd say it's probably $11 because north of Mexico laborers get paid a hell of a lot more than Chinese, Vietnamese, or Indian workers, but not as much as American, but catching up.
Okay.
So Mexico's not as cheap as you think it would be, but still cheaper than the United States, but not as cheap as most Asian manufacturing origins.
Because the car companies have been manufacturing in Mexico for many years, so
Sure.
they would know this better than most.
But let's think about that. Why does it make sense for cars and washing machines in Mexico first, that is maquiladoras? Because the cost of freight is so expensive. These are big, bulky items. And you also have a lot of automation in those manufacturing plants. To build a washing machine or a car, there's a lot more robots involved than in making a bag.
Oh, interesting. So it's the human labor cost that's keeping the production still in Asia mainly.
Yeah, exactly. Because the logistics costs are much higher. But anything that can be robotically made or automated, you're going to try to onshore it, bring it back to the United States first. That removes all risks and all variables. It's just the high cost of unions and labor production in the United States. So if you reduce the number of workers and make it more machine-made or robotic-made, it's very feasible to have manufacturing in the United States. You can bring manufacturing to the U.S., not necessarily jobs, but the jobs you are bringing back are very high-paying technical jobs running these robots.
Well, this is what AI is all about right now,
Sure.
too, about wiping out an entire generation of potential lower skilled workers with automation.
But the consumer wins. The John Smith in Gary, Indiana, going to buy Christmas gifts for his kids will still be able to spend $80 and get away with it. But if you still want to manufacture it in a more expensive country, like China's becoming more and more expensive with the cost of transportation, John Smith can't afford to buy those same gifts anymore. But if you bring that down to an automated robot manufacturing somewhere else in the United States, Gary Smith might be out of a job now.
Yeah.
But at least he's still paying $80 for those gifts.
And it's hard to, I mean, how do I want to say this, like nicely or gently? But how do you decide what the price of a good is? I mean, how do you decide what the price of a laborer is in a different part of the world? Because essentially companies are making this decision by staying and investing or fleeing to go to other cheap places. So, for example, if the bag company just decided like it was going to cost $15 to make a bag and China's $10 and Mexico is $11, but I can make this in Texas for $13 or $14, then Joe Smith in Indiana is just going to have to fork out another $2 or whatever for his bag.
But he might get a job making those bags that he might have not had otherwise. So good for U.S. employment.
Right, great for U.S. employment. But like when does that balance tilt or shift to bring all this manufacturing back? Like when are people going to just start accepting that things have to cost more in order to be more efficiently made, or to reduce the logistical dangers of things around the world that we can't control.
American named Adam Smith.
I have heard of Adam Smith.
The invisible hand of market. Let market decide.
Yeah.
So in other words, the chapter in my book, shout out that you don't want governments to interfere, to force jobs back to the United States, to put up 20% import duties against products. That's not natural. The consumer pays for that. But if you let market forces decide what should be made where, it will eventually be made at the most efficient place to make it, combining production cost and logistics cost to delivery. And let the market decide that.
So it's a laissez-faire approach, and let
I'm
it.
a big believer in it.
Just throw the chips up and let them settle where they may, and they'll settle in the places where they're most efficient, most effective, most cost-effective, and best for the end user and the consumer.
I agree with everything, and this is what I strongly believe in that. As long as you're not talking about copyright infringement, you're not talking about dual-use military, you're not talking about an enemy getting an upper hand over you. So we're getting into geopolitics, okay, I might have an opinion, which is different from that. That aside from those military type of concerns, I'm a big believer in laissez-faire, let the market figure it out.
Interesting. Brilliant. Wow. I'm blown away. Amazing. Is there anything else you want to chat about?
I said there was going to be whiskey on Friday. I mean, what the?
Whiskey on Friday. We can go get this. It's outside. We can definitely do that. But is there anything else you want to chat about? I'm blown away by this. I'm going to need like a week to just take it all in and come back to you. Hopefully you'll come back again someday.
But we'll come back
with some more questions.
With respect to global supply chain, no. But we were asking earlier about how do you manage this? I mean, first off, how do you not go nuts with the stress of balancing all that?
Yeah.
And what I wanted to share with you, and this could be relevant for others to learn from, it's about balance in life. That I have my work, and it's extremely busy and stressful and all that, but it's not my everything. My everything is my family, what I do for the world in terms of philanthropy, what I do for myself in terms of exercise, and doing my job professionally. So you have to have balance. Every day, something's going to fuck up. Someone's going to stress you. You did poorly on something, and you're going to be, it's horrible. But then you have the other three very important issues in your life, whether it's family, whether it's something soulful like yoga or exercise or religion, whatever turns you on, or doing good for the world, philanthropy, if you will. For me, that's been my secret to being balanced, is it's not all eggs in one basket. And time priority management, that you pick 5 from each category every single day and say, those are my A's. I got to get those done today. And don't get distracted by the noisy things which aren't important. And don't just focus on work. But okay, get my work done, do it efficiently, but also, what have I done for my family today? What have I done for philanthropy today? What have I done for other things that matter in my life? And always remind yourself that it's not just work and it's not just play. You got to kind of balance things.
Yeah. And here you're educating me. It's brilliant. And whoever else is out there watching it, and this will stay up.
We all learn. I'm learning every day.
That's good. Well, man, it's great to connect with you again.
We're neighbors
now. We are neighbors now. Welcome to America. Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
Eddie.
Great flick.
Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall. Do you remember that?
I do. Great scene when he was in a jacuzzi. We'll leave it. Remember that movie?
I just remember the opener where the lady comes up from the pool and she's like, "The Royal Highness's penis is clean."
That was the scene. He wasn't he was sitting in a jacuzzi receiving the cleaning. That's right.
Yeah, that's everyone's goal. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much for the chat. Come back anytime. And this was beautiful. And your knowledge of the stuff you do on a daily basis, like, just blew my mind.
But I don't know anything about anything else. That's all I know.
And that's okay. It's okay to have, one thing you're really good at.
I try. It's fine.
Okay, so now we're going to go to our double screen here. So come in.
Coming in.
Thank you very much. And watch this. We can fade to black.
Fade to black.
Gone.
That's fine.